It starts with something almost invisible, a tiny inconsistency that flits past your notice like a moth in the night. You hear them say they left work at 5, but the sun was already dipping below the horizon when they stepped outside. You catch the mismatch, but shrug it off. It feels trivial. It feels harmless. You decide to ignore it. That moment, when you choose comfort over confrontation, becomes the hinge on which everything swings. Small lies are the silent invitations we never see, soft appeals to our empathy, our desire to believe the best in others. When you let them slide, you signal that you're safe territory, fertile ground for trust to take root. You water that trust with your silent assent. White lies flicker like candle flames in conversation. I'm just 5 minutes away, they say, as you sit waiting by the door. I didn't see your message until now, they claim, though your chat shows 3 unread texts. Each tiny admission of fault is tempered by an excuse you're willing to accept. You want to be generous. You tell yourself it's easier this way. Cultivators of influence know this all too well. They teach you to overlook the small deceptions, so you'll let your guard down. They sprinkle these minor falsehoods across your shared moments, testing your willingness to forgive and forget. With each overlooked lie, your internal alarm softens. You begin to question your own doubts, wondering if you're too suspicious. Once the pattern is established, they escalate. The concessions you made for no big deal, fibes pave the path for bigger requests. You lent a cup of sugar. Next time they'll ask for your weekend. You excused a tiny misrepresentation. Soon you're parting with your savings. Every small lie you ignored becomes a brick in the bridge. They build toward your compliance. Imagine a stranger at a networking event who tells you they graduated from your alma mater. You nod, intrigued, but a quick search would prove otherwise. You don't bother. You feel connected in that moment. You feel affinity. Later, that same stranger taps you for an introduction to a key client because you think of them as one of your own. That illusion of kinship springs from the soil of ignored lies. Psychologically, your brain rewards you for overlooking tiny faults. Confirmation bias kicks in. You've decided they're trustworthy, so every fibe becomes an outlier rather than a pattern. You celebrate your own open-mindedness, your generous spirit. But generosity untethered from discernment is a gift you give to manipulators. The strangest part is how it feels like kindness. You're proud of your willingness to believe. You tell yourself you're giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But with each doubt you dismiss, you chip away at the boundary between compassion and gullibility. That boundary, once solid, becomes as thin as paper, and then it rips. Con artists often instruct apprentices to practice the 2-second pardon. The moment a potential mark catches a slip, they must interject an apology or plausible excuse and steer attention elsewhere. The mark obediently accepts the pardon, resetting the exchange. It's a dance of misdirection, tiny lies, quick forgive, vault the guard. Each forgiveness lowers the moat, protecting your judgment. You can feel it in your own bones when you've been drawn in. A nagging voice whispers that something isn't right, but you hush it, or worse, blame yourself for being cynical. You chalk it up to misunderstanding or stress. You ignore that inner alarm because you've already decided to ignore the lie. Breaking the spell requires a simple but uncomfortable shift. Treat every lie, no matter how small, as a clue. Let the tiniest distortion ring an alarm. Probe gently. Ask for details. Let the conversation cool instead of racing ahead. When you demand clarity, you remind yourself that trust is earned through consistency, not granted through convenience. Trust is a fragile artifact. It cracks under pressure. Small lies are the pressure points. When you learn to spot them and refuse to smooth them over, you reclaim your agency. You stop handing over your confidence like candy. You force others to show up fully or reveal themselves. And when someone presses you to ignore those febs, you'll feel the weight of the choice. You can slip back into complacency, or you can stand firm, insisting that honesty matters at every turn. Because in a world of polished deceptions, the tiniest lie carries a force all its own. Every small lie you ignore tightens the noose of manipulation. Every lie you challenge loosens that grip, setting you free to trust with purpose, not by default. You settle into a quiet cafe, steam curling from your cup like a whispered promise. Across the table, your friend's voice trembles as she recounts yet another injustice. Her boss is a tyrant, her partner is ungrateful, the world itself is conspiring against her. You lean in, drawn by the pain in her tone. You feel a swell of compassion. You want to help. You want to believe she's a victim of cruel circumstances. But something in the way she speaks, the repetition of "it's all their fault," the relentless parade of blame, makes you uneasy. That unease, it's the outline of a trap. Why does pointing fingers earn pity? Because it awakens our instinct to protect the weak. When someone shifts blame onto others, they become the wounded party, and you, an empathetic bystander, are invited to align with their suffering. You lower your guard, you side with the accuser, and the more blame they heap onto external forces, the more they tighten their grip on your empathy. Have you noticed how this plays out in everyday life? The co-worker who claims every missed deadline is due to a colleague's incompetence. The partner who convinces you that every argument stems from your stubbornness or misunderstanding. Even in politics, where leaders blame unseen enemies, economic collapse, cultural decay, foreign adversaries to rally support. Blame shifting is a universal lever used to extract sympathy, loyalty, and obedience. At its heart, blame shifting feeds our need for moral clarity. We crave clear villains. When someone shoulders all the victimhood, they become the hero of their own story, helpless, wronged, deserving of rescue, and rescuers. You are drawn into the narrative. You want to save them. You want to correct the injustice. You want to prove you're on the side of good. But what happens when that rescue mission never ends? When every solution is greeted by another complaint? You start to feel hollow. You give advice, you lend support, you extend favors. Yet the accusations never cease. That's because blame shifting isn't about fixing problems, it's about maintaining control. Sympathy is currency. Guilt is leverage, and you, the sympathetic listener, unwittingly fund their emotional bank account. Imagine a manager who blames her team for every failed project. She paints a picture of chaos without her steady hand. She cultivates dependency by convincing everyone that only she can steer the ship. Each time a milestone is missed, she stages a crisis, casting her colleagues as the saboteurs. You watch the team scramble to appease her, hoping for approval. But the approval never lasts because the script demands a perpetual crisis. Without blame to assign, the story falls apart. This strategy thrives on consistency. Once someone establishes the pattern of blaming others, they reinforce it with every interaction. It becomes easier to point outward than to look inward. Taking responsibility requires vulnerability. Blaming others demands only a steady supply of grievances. And grievances are contagious. One person's bitterness sparks another's frustrations, multiplying the sense of injustice until it feels righteous. What if you recognized the pattern? What if, instead of lining up behind the victim, you stepped back and observed the choreography of blame? You'd see how every finger pointed outward creates a circle that insulates the blamer from self-reflection. You'd notice how sympathy becomes a shield against accountability. And you'd realize that each time you side with the blame, you feed the cycle. Breaking free starts with a question: who benefits? When you sense the blame shifting, ask yourself why they need to be the victim. What power do they gain by denying their own mistakes? Every misstep they deny, every apology they withhold, cements their authority over others. The less they admit, the larger their dominion grows. This isn't about withholding compassion. True empathy recognizes pain without endorsing perpetual victimhood. You can feel for someone's struggle while still holding them to the same standards of responsibility you hold yourself. You can say, "I'm sorry this hurt you," and follow with, "But what part can you own?" That shift challenges the script. It forces them to face their role in the narrative rather than hiding behind a cast of scapegoats. In relationships, at work, in social circles, blame shift secures sympathy, but it also erodes trust. When the facade cracks, resentment surfaces, you realize you've been manipulated into defending someone who refuses to defend themselves. And the bond you thought was forged by shared emotion turns brittle under the weight of unspoken frustrations. Cultivating genuine connection means holding space for both vulnerability and accountability. It means listening to the hurt without swallowing the blame. It means recognizing that every finger pointed outward casts four back at the blamer. True strength lies not in being blamed, but in facing blame when it's due and seeking redemption, not refuge. Next time you encounter that litany of grievances, pause. Notice the rhythm of accusations. Feel how your chest tightens, how empathy surges. Remember that sympathy is not an endless resource. It must be earned, not extorted. Ask yourself what story lies beneath the blame. Who would we be if we refused to accept the role of victim? Who could we become if we owned our mistakes? Blame shifting secures sympathy, but it steals something far more valuable: the chance to grow. Real healing demands more than sympathetic nods. It demands accountability, ownership, transformation, and real connection. Deep, lasting connection can only thrive in that soil. So guard your empathy. Recognize the trap, and remember, when blame is handed out like currency, it's time to cash in your compassion and insist on the real conversation underneath. You find yourself sitting across a polished table as a colleague lays out two almost identical proposals. They speak quickly, breezily. "We can do option A or option B. Take your pick." You glance down at the paper. The only real difference is a single word buried in a paragraph you barely skimmed. You feel pressure to choose. The room seems to shrink, and suddenly you're eager to comply, to nod and sign off. Why? Because your mind craves simplicity. When choices collapse into a trivial yes or no, your resistance evaporates. This trick is everywhere. A salesperson offers you a starter package or a premium package, nothing in between. A friend invites you to a weekend trip. Join us Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon. Those small windows feel like real decisions, but they're carefully trimmed to steer you toward compliance. You think you're choosing, but really you're surrendering. Downplayed choices transform complicated dilemmas into simple permissions. Why does this work? Our brains avoid decision fatigue. Too many options overload our prefrontal cortex, triggering anxiety and procrastination. Strip choices down to a bare minimum, and compliance becomes effortless. You don't mull over pros and cons, you don't debate. You just pick from the menu laid out before you. That menu might only have one or two items, but it feels complete, and so you decide. Quickly, unquestioningly. Think about how a manipulator might exploit this. In a heated family dispute, they frame your response as either total agreement or outright betrayal. There's no room for nuance, no space to express doubts. Your compliance is coerced by the illusion of choice. You agree because the alternative feels unthinkable. You've been herded into a corner by the narrowing lines of acceptable answers. In advertising, bundles are another form of downplayed options. You see a basic plan for one price, a deluxe plan for double. Rarely do they show you a custom plan or let you build your own. They wrest and control back by limiting your choices. You feel you only have to decide between good and better. The pressure to say yes increases when you sense an invisible hand guiding you toward the more expensive option. On a deeper level, this technique taps into our fear of missing out. When choices are scarce, opportunities feel urgent. You believe you must act now, pick one, or be left behind. A cult recruiter might whisper that membership is open for a limited time, that you must choose this weekend or never. You suddenly weigh only the immediate options. That scarcity of choice triggers compliance, a surrender disguised as empowerment. Yet there's another layer. By downplaying choices, manipulators shape your identity. You internalize a binary self-image. You're either on board or against them. You stop seeing yourself as someone with complex opinions. You become the yes person or the no person. And once you accept that label, you'll default to it. Your sense of self narrows along with your options. In high-pressure sales environments, this tactic is taught as false dichotomy. Present two extremes, and you funnel people toward the one that serves you best. A debt collector might offer a full payment now, or nothing at all, no payment plans, no negotiations. Faced with that, you pay up or risk worse consequences. You comply because the option to negotiate disappears under the weight of that stark choice. But downplayed choices can also disguise generosity. A friend may ask you to lend support in broad terms, "Can I count on you?" rather than specifying the time or effort required. You say yes, imagining a brief chat, not an endless commitment. Later, when the real demands surface, you feel obligated because you already agreed. By downplaying the scope of the ask, they lock you into a promise you never fully understood. You can spot this trick if you pay attention to what's missing. Do the options leave out important details? Are there unspoken alternatives that suddenly emerge after you commit? When you feel pressure to decide quickly, ask yourself, what choices are hidden? The real power lies in the options you don't see. A manager might frame feedback as a simple choice between meeting expectations or falling short. No discussion of context, no exploration of improvement. You nod along because there's no visible middle ground. You're compliant before you realize you've agreed. The antidote is to expand the menu. Name the missing options. Propose a third path. Ask for time to consider. Silence the rush. When someone says just pick A or B, counter with what else could I do? By bringing hidden choices into the light, you reclaim control. You remind yourself that life is rarely binary. You restore the complexity you deserve. And remember, downplayed choices only work when you accept the illusion. Once you challenge the narrow box they've built, the compliance vanishes. You open the door to genuine consent, to decisions made on your own terms. In that space, you regain power. In that space, you start saying yes because you truly want to, not because they made it feel like the only option. You scroll through your feed late at night, drawn in by a promise of transformation. The headline teases a breakthrough, hidden in layers of complex jargon. Leverage synergy, harness quantum focus, decode the blueprint for exponential change. Your mind reels as each phrase builds on the last, twisting like a labyrinth with no exit. Questions multiply faster than answers. You lean in, desperate for clarity, and then they offer it, a simple step, a one-click solution, the magic bullet you've been craving. Relief washes over you, but that relief is the cage. That pattern, drown the mind in confusion, then hand it a lifeline, is time-tested. Confusion disarms you. Your brain craves resolution more than almost anything else. Faced with a storm of terms you don't understand, you abandon skepticism and grasp at any explanation. You become vulnerable. You lower your guard. In that moment, the person offering clarity holds the power. You're no longer a skeptic, you're a believer in their solution. Imagine a friend describing an advanced health hack, dropping references to mitochondrial optimization and cellular detox protocols you've never heard of. You nod, pretending to follow until your head aches. Then they reveal the secret. Drink this special tonic every morning. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Your confusion and the agony it wrought vanishes. You trust them. You buy the tonic. You join their group. That sequence plays out in boardrooms, in marketing funnels, even in cult gatherings. Offer confusion, then solution. At first glance, the trick seems innocent. After all, who wouldn't appreciate a shortcut through complexity? But beneath the veneer lies manipulation. By controlling what you understand, the orchestrator controls what you feel. They manufacture mental discomfort, then position themselves as the deliverer of comfort. Each moment of uncertainty becomes leverage, each question a lever to pry open your wallet, your loyalty, or your obedience. As the tactic evolves, you begin to see it in more subtle forms. A self-help guru drops you endless lists of steps. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, all sounding crucial yet abstract. Your notebook fills with cryptic reminders while your mind buzzes with doubt. Then comes the webinar. Join now and I'll guide you through every step. You sign up, believing they alone can illuminate the path. Your hope becomes their currency. Even in everyday life, you face this ploy. Technical support menus lead you in circles, then gently connect you to the very person who invited your confusion. Political speeches wrap you in contradictory statements until the candidate offers a single phrase that cuts through the fog. Relationship counselors list emotional pitfalls you've never considered, making you dependent on their advice. Everywhere you turn, the pattern repeats: bewilder, then rescue. Why does this work so well? It taps into the brain's most primal circuits. Confusion triggers cognitive discomfort. Your mind will do almost anything to alleviate that pain. It seeks closure. It craves answers. When someone dangles a simple solution, your brain rewards you with a rush of relief, pairing that person's voice with comfort. Neurochemically, you start to associate them with safety. Over time, you'll seek them out again and again, desperate for the next hit of certainty. This dynamic also feeds a deeper need for control. In a world of information overload, chaos feels overwhelming. You want an anchor, someone to point the way. The provider of the solution becomes your anchor. You grant them trust. You relinquish your own capacity to question. You start to believe that only they can translate the chaos into order. And that belief cements your dependency. But the more you lean on them, the less you trust yourself. You outsource your judgment. You stop noticing when gaps appear in their logic. You accept confusion as normal. Soon you crave the next confusing lesson, because it paves the way for the next promised clarity. You're trapped on a cycle of doubt and relief, confusion and salvation. To break free, you must recognize the pattern. Notice when explanations arrive, draped in needless complexity. Pay attention to your own discomfort, when your mind clenches in frustration. That is the moment you have power. Pause, demand plain language. Ask for examples, Seek independent verification. If someone truly has the answer, they will welcome your questions. They won't hide behind a wall of buzzwords or dread a request for clarity. When you encounter the trick again, label it for what it is, a power play disguised as generosity. Confusion is not a necessary step to understanding. It is a tool of control. Real insight does not require you to surrender your reason. True teachers guide you through complexity without abandoning you in the maze. Remember that confusion and solution are two faces of the same coin. One creates the need. The other exploits it. Spot the coin before it flips. Refuse the cage disguised as comfort. Insist on transparency. Trust your own capacity to learn at your own pace. In that space, clarity is not a gift from someone else, but a right you claim for yourself. In the end, the greatest solution is self-trust. When you learn to navigate confusion on your own, no one can harness your discomfort to control you. The labyrinth dissolves beneath your feet. You find your own path, and you discover that the true shortcut through complexity is the confidence to face uncertainty without surrendering your power. Imagine walking down a rainy street at dusk, when a suited stranger steps out of the shadows and presses a crisp envelope into your hand. Inside, you find cash, enough to erase your immediate worries. Relief floods your chest. You feel the weight of gratitude and the sudden urge to nod, to thank, to promise anything in return. That moment, when free money passes from their hand to yours, is the moment the real transaction begins. You tuck the envelope into your coat pocket and smile, convinced it's a gift, a kindness born of generosity. You tell yourself there are no strings attached. You breathe easier, believing you escaped a debt, only to carry a much heavier burden. Because with every bill you've accepted, you've unwittingly signed up for an invisible contract that leverages your gratitude against you. Consider the ancient rule of reciprocity. When someone gives, you feel compelled to give back. It's woven into the fabric of human interaction, designed to foster cooperation. Yet manipulators twist this law into a trap. They know that by offering free money, they ignite a spark of obligation that burns far brighter than any genuine goodwill. That spark grows into a coil of leverage. You begin to imagine ways to repay the debt. You offer small favors, covering a shift at work, picking up groceries, staying late at the office. Each act seems minor until it stretches you thinner, until you realize you've become the lender's silent partner in a scheme of control. Now picture the promise of a loan with zero interest. The words sound innocent, just a small advance until payday. No fees, no catch. You sign a flimsy IOU, convinced you'll pay it back next week. But as the days roll on, the lender casually reminds you of your obligation. Each reminder feels polite, almost caring. Yet behind every message, there's pressure building, like water behind a dam. Cult leaders and con artists deploy this tactic expertly. They offer free housing, free meals, free retreats, inviting curious souls into their fold. At first, you marvel at the generosity. You feel chosen, special. But soon the gratitude becomes a chain, binding you to endless commitments, cleaning floors at dawn, recruiting friends at dusk, renouncing your old life in the middle. With every task, leverage grows. Those interest-free advances transform into moral debts. You find yourself volunteering more hours, giving more money, defending the group to skeptical outsiders. You cling to the belief that you're repaying a kindness, even as the kindness morphs into relentless demands. Each unpaid loan, even one never intended to be repaid, becomes a ghost in your mind. You hear its whisper when you consider leaving. You imagine disappointing your benefactor, dishonoring their gift. That guilt is the most powerful currency of all, extracted slowly, week by week, until you're too entangled to walk away. In the corporate world, a similar dance unfolds. A manager offers you an interest-free advance on your salary after you mention a car repair. You thank them profusely. But soon they hint you owe them your loyalty, your evenings, your weekend calls. What began as a lifeline becomes leverage for unpaid overtime and fawning praise. Even friends and family can weaponize this tactic. A relative offers you a large loan to get you back on your feet, then disappears whenever you try to set clear repayment terms. You hesitate to press them. You fear they'll rescind the offer and leave you stranded once more. So how do you spot the trap under the guise of generosity? Notice how quickly the gift is offered. Pay attention to vague terms whenever you can, whenever you want. Ask yourself, what do they gain by giving? Do they ask nothing? Or do they wait for a moment to call in the favor? If the gift comes with a subtle expectation, it isn't free. When you receive unexpected help, pause, breathe, ask for clarity. Say, thank you. What do you expect in return? Let that simple question reveal the hidden contract. True generosity doesn't require negotiation. It doesn't keep mental score. It doesn't leverage your gratitude into control. Imagine standing in front of that stranger again, envelope in hand. This time, you feel the coil of obligation tightening around your wrist. You slip the money back, refusing the unspoken bargain. You step away into the rain, lighter, untethered. Remember that free money is never free. It's a Trojan horse carrying the seeds of manipulation. When you accept it, you invite unseen debts into your life. The next time someone offers you an interest-free loan, watch the strings before you take that step. Because the real cost is paid, not in dollars, but in the freedom of your choices. You step into the supermarket long after dawn, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The shelves that should hold staples lie barren, save for a single packet of toilet paper perched on the edge. Your pulse quickens. You glance around. Empty carts, frantic shoppers, rifling through the last cans of beans. A knot tightens in your stomach. Something about scarcity ignites a deep instinctual panic. Your mind floods with urgency. You imagine coming home to empty cupboards. You imagine the shame of returning defeated. That fear claws at your thoughts until you snatch that last packet before someone else does. It feels like survival. It feels like necessity. But the truth is darker. It's a trick. Fake scarcity is a masterstroke of manipulation. Supply never truly ran out. A new shipment arrived last night. Yet the illusion of emptiness swept through the aisles like wildfire. Cultivated shortages, limited stock signs, and dramatic announcements filter your perception. You believe time is running out. You believe you must act now or lose everything. Why do you panic? Because your brain equates rarity with value. This is the scarcity heuristic at work. When something appears limited, it grows in your mind. You convince yourself you need more than you do. A single empty shelf triggers a cascade of desire. A packet of pasta becomes a symbol of safety. Logic dissolves. Then there's social proof. The sight of others scrambling triggers the same reflex in you. You hear the clink of cans tossed into carts. You see the final loaf of bread vanish in someone else's hands. Your focus narrows to a single thought. Secure my share before it's gone. That tunnel vision is no accident. It's engineered by campaigns built to prey on your herd instinct. Retailers and life hackers whisper scripts in your ear. Only 48 hours left. While supplies last, exclusive pre-order ends tonight. You click buttons on your phone, Join waiting lists, refresh pages, countdown timers taunt you with every second lost. Emails drop into your inbox like ticking bombs. Each alert tightens the noose of urgency around your decision-making. This engineered panic doesn't just drive sales, it fuels hoarding. As you watch others stockpile, you stockpile too. Shelves clear faster than they can be restocked. You end up with enough to share with a small army. Yet the day after, when the frenzy subsides, you realize you hoarded for a ghost. The real supply remains steady, untouched beneath layers of fear. You might think you're immune. You might say, "I'm too logical for that." But every mind is vulnerable to the racing clock and empty shelf. Even savvy consumers freeze when confronted with the illusion of shortage. Your critical thinking slips away the moment you see that last item glaring back at you. To see through the haze, you must pause mid-sprint, breathe, ask simple questions. Is this really limited or just marketed that way? When will stock be replenished? Who benefits from my panic? Question the scarcity narrative before you empty your cart and your wallet. True preparedness doesn't require terror. Real community support shares resources, not hoards them. Genuine emergencies call for calm action, not blind frenzy. When you slow your breath, you realize the world didn't end with that empty shelf. The only disaster was your own mind hijacked by artificial limits. Fake scarcity drives panic, buying by feeding your ancient survival circuits with modern illusions. It sells you fear wrapped in marketing gloss. It thrives on your sense of loss aversion, intensifies your social contagion, and locks you in a cycle of unnecessary consumption. Recognize it. Reject it. Choose clarity over chaos. When you reclaim control, you see the empty shelf for what it is, a clever trap, not a genuine crisis. You step back from the edge of panic, your hand loosening on the cart. In that quiet moment lies real power, the freedom to decide without the ticking clock dictating your heartbeat. Your voice falters when you question them. A simple pause after a statement feels like a betrayal of loyalty. You asked for proof, an explanation, a second look. Instead, you feel a weight on your heart, as if doubt itself is a sin. Silence stretches between you, suffocating, accusing. You want to speak, but your words stick in your throat, because from the moment you voiced uncertainty, guilt arrived at your door. They lean in close, eyes soft but hollow. "I would never lie to you," they say. But behind the words you sense a blade cutting through your logic. They tilt their head, opening their arms in a gesture of wounded innocence. That gesture is a trap. It invites you to comfort them, to apologize. It invites you to take back your question, erase your doubt, so you can restore the fragile peace. And so you do. Behind every question you ask, guilt waits. Guilt that you might be wrong. Guilt that you might have hurt someone you care about. Guilt that you might shatter the image they've so carefully built. Guilt that you might expose the truth lurking beneath the surface. Guilt that you are the villain for simply seeking the facts. That guilt is the puppet master, and your hesitation is the strings. They master this trick because guilt is ancient. It lived in our ancestors as a way to keep tribes intact. When someone broke the rules, shame and guilt tied them to the community's judgment. In modern minds, that ancient program still runs. When you doubt, your brain floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your chest constricts. Your throat tightens. You feel vulnerable. You feel wrong. You feel small. That physical pang is the signal they crave. They corner you until your defenses crumble. They remind you of your past mistakes, real or fabricated. They dredge up every insecurity, every failure you locked away, They whisper that only you could misunderstand. They offer a false mercy, a way to escape the pain by surrendering your doubt. You accept, because the ache in your chest is unbearable. It might start harmlessly, a partner insisting that you overthink, a friend who claims you're being paranoid, a colleague who says you're imagining problems. Each time you shrug and back down, each time guilt spreads through your veins like poison, each time you lose a little confidence, doubt becomes dangerous. Doubt becomes a threat. Doubt becomes your enemy. And then they raise the stakes. They say you're ungrateful for their efforts. They say you're turning on the one person who cares. They say you're broken inside, and only they can fix you. They wrap control in warmth, a velvet glove around an iron fist. You cling to that warmth, because the alternative, your own mistrust, is a bitter loneliness. So you trade freedom for reassurance. Again and again, there is a moment when guilt no longer feels like guilt. It feels like love. It feels like protection. It feels like belonging. You confuse their coercion with devotion. You mistake their gaslighting for guidance. You embrace the lie that doubt is the real betrayal. And just like that, they've turned you inside out. Over time, you internalize their shame. You reshape your sense of self to fit their mold. Every doubt you swallow chips away at your confidence. Little by little, you become the person they need you to be. Quiet, compliant, convinced that your own instincts are the enemy. You lose yourself through that same guilt you once dismissed. They string this trick together like a melody. Doubt, shame, apology, reward, confidence, doubt, and the cycle repeats. It's hypnotic. It's relentless. It's a trap, laid with invisible bars. Your world shrinks. Your boundaries dissolve. Your autonomy fades. All because you felt guilty for trusting your instincts. But you can break free. The first step is to catch the whisper. The moment guilt appears in response to your doubt, pause. Notice the tension in your chest. Notice the quick flicker of self-criticism. Notice the urge to apologize. That urge is the red flag. It tells you that someone else is steering your reactions. That telltale pang is the spot where control seeps in. You can breathe, stand tall, and let doubt exist without apology. You can say, "I need more information," or "Help me understand why you see it differently." You can refuse to swallow the blame. You can reclaim your questions as your right. Doubt is not betrayal. Doubt is curiosity. Doubt is the compass guiding you toward truth. So when that familiar ache rises, don't let it tighten the chains. Let it sharpen your awareness instead. Let it become the fuel that powers your questions. Let it remind you that you deserve answers without shame. Because no one has the right to make you feel guilty for the simple act of wondering. Hold your doubt like a lantern in the dark. Let it illuminate deception and guide you to clarity. Because when guilt loses its power over your questions, your truth finally has room to breathe. But nothing is more liberating than that. Have you ever opened your inbox at dawn and felt a pulse of dread before you even read a single word? A dozen messages glare at you, each subject line screaming for attention in bold capitals. You click the first one, and suddenly statistics, charts, quotes, and bullet points crash over you like a tidal wave. Your eyes dart across the screen, your mind races and confusion seeps in. Data piles up. Your brain feels overloaded. You struggle to breathe under the weight of that information avalanche. But then, just when you think you cannot take another fact, a simple phrase appears at the bottom. Here's exactly what you should do next. Relief floods you. A whisper of certainty cuts through the noise. You aren't asked to think, you're asked to follow. You click. But why? Because the barrage has shattered your ability to question. You're desperate to escape the whirlwind, to anchor yourself to something solid, and so you comply. Your brain can hold only so much at once. Cognitive scientists call this cognitive load. Under a heavy load of data, your critical thinking shutters. You become like a ship caught in a storm, tossed by waves of numbers and narratives. Your defenses weaken. The moment the directive lands, a link, a call to action, you seize it as a lifeline. You follow without hesitation. You're lulled into compliance because the manipulator has replaced your reasoning with a recipe. Even in corporate boardrooms, the strategy is identical. Executives unload slide decks, thick with projections, market analyses, SWOT matrices, charts in 18 colors, bullet points in triple digits. The meeting drags on, your eyes glaze over. Your only relief, when the presenter clicks to the final slide and offers a single decision. Betrove this plan. Exhausted by the information treadmill, you nod, you vote yes. You sign the dotted line. You've traded your critical faculties for a moment's respite. Consider the fundraising email you encountered. First, a wall of statistics about suffering, stories of hardship, bullet points listing tragic numbers. Your heart aches. You scroll. Then comes the ask. Donate now to save lives. At that moment, your judgment surrenders. You give. You share. You feel good about yourself. But you never pause to ask who orchestrated that emotional torrent or why those specific figures were chosen. The technique works every time because you are overwhelmed. On social media, the pattern repeats. 15 slides packed with glossy infographics about health claims, alluring promises. Scientific jargon flying by. You nod along, hoping to absorb the insights. And at the final slide, a swipe-up link beckons. Join our masterclass. You commit to a purchase you never planned. Why? Because your desire for resolution outweighed your demand for verification. You needed a guide to interpret the chaos you just consumed. Think of your brain as a cup. You can pour liquid into it only up to its brim. When someone pours fast enough, the cup overflows and you can't distinguish each droplet. That overflow is your overwhelmed mind. A single drop of instruction lands on the surface and you reflexively grasp it. You feel anchored even though you've surrendered control. The manipulator uses your cup's limits against you, flooding you to the point where their directive feels precious. Overwhelm with info, then direct. It's a deceptive dance between fear and relief. The fear comes from too much data. The relief arrives in a single command. That relief feels earned. It feels like progress. It feels like control, but it is a false control. You traded one confusion for another direction. Your autonomy slipped through the cracks of your scattered attention. You trusted the directive more than your own judgment. How do you reclaim your power? First, notice the flood before it begins. When you sense those early tremors of overwhelm, too many bullets, too many links, pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, do I need all these details, or am I being guided toward a pre-written path? Limit yourself to 3 data points. If the message exceeds that limit, defer your response. Third, rewrite the narrative. Replace the manipulator's directive with your own question. What matters most to me? Overwhelm with info, then direct. Remember these words the next time you face a torrent of facts, followed by a promise of clarity. The tactic hides in sleek presentations, polished speeches, and glossy emails. It whispers that certainty lies behind one more click, one more statistic. It blooms in the space you carve between stimulus and reaction. When you refuse to chase every data stream and demand room to think, you break the spell. You become the author of your choices again. And that simple decision to pause may be the most radical act of defiance in a world designed to direct you. You walk into a crowded room, and someone leans in, voice hushed, revealing a secret wound. Their eyes glisten with tears as they confess a childhood betrayal or a hidden fear. You feel a rush of compassion, an instinct to soothe and protect. In that moment, their vulnerability feels sacred and real, drawing you in like a moth to a flicker of flame. Vulnerability breeds connection. When we witness another's pain, we lower our shields, we mirror their heartbeat, synchronizing our emotions without realizing it. We crave authentic bonds, and when someone appears exposed, we rush to build a bridge between us. We lean closer, offer comfort, share pieces of our own fractured stories. Trust grows in that fertile soil. But what if the wounds are feigned? What if the tears are staged? Pretended vulnerability is the most insidious of charms, a sleight of hand that hijacks your empathy. It's a social con trick, a carefully crafted confession designed to lower your guard, to prime you for devotion. By pretending to bleed, they siphon your compassion and channel it toward their agenda. Imagine a politician standing at a podium, voice trembling as they describe personal hardships. You nod along, heart softened, ready to vote in solidarity. Behind the scenes, advisors coached each tear, scripted every pause. Their vulnerability becomes a tool to secure loyalty, to bind you to promises you didn't even know you were making. This manipulation relies on ancient wiring. When someone appears vulnerable, your brain floods with oxytocin, the bonding hormone. You feel closer, more protective, more inclined to trust. Your defenses dissolve, your skepticism fades. You become a collaborator in their ruse, pouring goodwill into an account that never balances. Cult leaders exploit this tactic ruthlessly. They gather newcomers into hushed circles, whispering tales of personal suffering. They share raw confessions, stories of abuse, abandonment, despair, then invite you to join their tribe. You offer empathy, time, resources. You become invested in their narrative, believing you alone understand their pain, and in return, you receive allegiance and obedience. Salespeople use the same hack. They recall a difficult childhood or early career struggles when you ask about their background. You sympathize, buying more readily because you feel you owe them something. That sense of indebtedness, born from pseudo-vulnerability, nudges your credit card forward. You punish yourself for rejecting someone who trusted you first. The process unfolds in subtle stages. First, a glimpse of fragility, a trembling lip, a voice cracking, then a fuller confession, often timed just before a request. You've already invested emotionally. The ask, whether a favor, a sale, or allegiance, feels natural, almost fair. You wouldn't abandon a friend in need, would you? So you comply, unaware that you're sealing the deal on deception. This tactic thrives online too. Influencers post tearful stories in late-night live streams. They recount personal crises, welcoming hugs from virtual strangers. You flood the chat with hearts and "I'm here for you." Your comments build their credibility, their viewer metrics, their bottom line. Before long, you're buying their merch, subscribing to paid content, feeling closer than ever to someone you've never met. Recognizing the pattern is your shield. Notice when someone's vulnerability seems rehearsed, when tearful tales always coincide with a product launch or a fundraising plea. Observe if the story shifts when you probe deeper, if details vanish under scrutiny. True vulnerability is messy and inconsistent. Pretended vulnerability follows a script. Ask yourself, Why did they choose that confession? Was it relevant to the moment or shoehorned into conversation? Did they pause for applause? Genuine emotion rarely times itself to an audience. It erupts unbidden, often leaving behind chaos, not polished narratives. Your defenses grow stronger when you set boundaries. Respond to vulnerable moments with measured empathy. One step back, one step forward. Share your own truth on your own terms. Reserve your deepest secrets for those who have earned them over time, not in the glare of a staged spotlight. Trust isn't a currency handed out freely after a confession. It's a fortress built brick by brick, mortar by shared experience and consistent integrity. True vulnerability risks real exposure, not just crafted mask. Genuine tears don't demand repayment. They ask only to be witnessed. So next time someone bares their soul, pause. Feel the pull of empathy, then question the source. Look for signs of performance, impeccable timing, rehearsed phrasing, applause lines. Let your compassion coexist with curiosity. Don't hand over your trust as payment for a tear-jerking monologue. In the end, pretending vulnerability is a con artist's favorite trick. It turns your kindness into chains that bind you to their will. But when you learn to spot the act, you reclaim your power. You can witness real pain without drowning in someone else's pretend storm. You can offer help where it's truly needed and walk away from games dressed as heartbreak. You hold the key to your own trust, free from manufactured tears. You step into the room, and the questions begin before you even notice the door closing behind you. A calm voice offers two choices. Would you prefer our standard plan or the deluxe option? It sounds like freedom, but it is the first link in an invisible chain. You think you are deciding. You believe you are in control, but every choice they offer is designed to lead you down the same path, to sign, to commit, to surrender your will without realizing it. At the heart of the multiple closing options trap lies a subtle illusion. You feel powerful, you feel autonomous, yet those choices are carefully curated. Each path, each colored ribbon, each menu item has been crafted to funnel you toward the exact outcome the persuader wants. It is the art of steering without appearing to steer, of guiding without admitting guidance. By presenting options, they avoid outright commands. They let you convince yourself that you chose, while they quietly close every exit except the one they want you to take. Think of it like walking through a hallway of doors. You see a door painted green and another painted blue. You reach for the green one, convinced it holds something different. Yet both lead you into the same room, the room where the deal is sealed. They never ask, "Do you want to buy?" They ask, "Would you like the green door or the blue door?" Your mind lights up with possibility. You feel your pulse quicken as you lean forward. You made your choice, and then you realize you are already inside. This trick relies on a deeper psychological tug, the need to choose. Human beings detest feeling pushed or coerced. So instead of telling you what to do, persuaders hand you the illusion of autonomy. You pick the color, the size, the payment plan. You decide the timing, yet all roads converge. By the time you recognize the pattern, you have already signed your name, given up your email, agreed to a monthly fee. You are committed. You are bound, and you never felt forced. As the tactic grows more complex, it weaves in other lures. You are offered the choice between two slightly different sacrifices, a higher upfront cost with a discount versus a lower cost with added fees. They position one as savvy and one as cautious, appealing to different facets of your identity. You debate within yourself which version of you want to be today, bold or prudent. You play both roles expertly. And all the while, the outcome remains the same. They get what they want, and you walk away believing you outsmarted them. Spotting the multiple closing options, trap demands slowing down. Listen for questions that offer your mind pathways instead of a simple yes or no. Notice when every choice tilts toward one outcome. Pay attention to how the choices are framed. Are they evenly balanced, or does one glow like a beacon while the other fades in dull light? Are the paths laid out in a way that makes you feel clever for choosing? That cleverness is the hook. When you catch the trap, you can step outside its walls. Instead of picking a door they painted for you, ask for a new door. Say, I appreciate the options, but I would like to hear alternative paths, or respond. Neither choice appeals to me. Can we explore different possibilities? Such a refusal shatters the illusion. It reveals the hallway for what it is, a guided corridor built to contain your choices. Breaking free from this trap not only protects you from signing unwanted agreements, but also reclaims your true agency. Once you refuse the staged options, you force the persuader to offer real choices or to resort to overt pressure, which you can recognize and resist more easily. You shift the power back into your hands. You transform the manipulator's hallway of doors into a room of possibilities you truly decide. Every time you find yourself selecting from a menu of guided options, remember this: real freedom isn't about choosing between two curtains. It's about asking why those curtains exist and demanding a stage of your own. When you refuse to play by their script, you reclaim your story. And in that space, genuine choice, untainted and unfettered, finally emerges. It starts with a promise. Not a loud one, not something announced or declared, but something subtle, delivered in pieces, in moments, in quiet rewards. You get a little bonus for hitting your sales target, a few more privileges for staying loyal, a pat on the back, an extra perk, a quiet upgrade. It's not enough to make you feel bought, but just enough to keep you hooked. These are drip benefits. Tiny calculated doses of comfort and reward, strategically administered to increase your dependency and your greed. You don't even notice it at first. You tell yourself you've earned it, that you deserve it, that it's a sign of your growth, your progress, your value. And maybe it is, but what matters isn't the benefit itself, it's the effect it has on you. Because slowly, quietly, these small incentives start to reshape how you think. You stop asking deeper questions. You stop challenging the system. You become invested in its continuation. Why? Because you don't want to lose what you've gained. This is how systems cultivate greed, not through overwhelming corruption, but through carefully designed satisfaction. The most effective manipulation isn't forced, it's desired, and greed, once ignited, becomes its own engine. You want more recognition, more rewards, more advantages. You start measuring success, not by meaning or ethics, but by benefits received. And it works especially well on people who once thought they were immune. People who believed they couldn't be bought, only to discover that everyone has a price. Their price isn't always money. Sometimes it's status, sometimes it's comfort, sometimes it's just being told you matter. But once the drip begins, stopping feels like regression, like punishment. And that's where the real control kicks in. You'll do more to avoid losing what you have than you ever did to gain it. Behavioral economists call it loss aversion, but in practice, it's fear disguised as ambition. You start bending your values, softening your criticism, looking the other way, just to maintain the stream. Even worse, you start comparing, not with those who have less, but with those who have more. You see a colleague get a bigger office, a higher bonus, a faster promotion, and suddenly your contentment evaporates. The drip has taught you to crave more, to expect more, to chase more. And now you're not just controlled, you're complicit. You start adjusting your behavior to align with what gets rewarded. You take fewer risks. You avoid rocking the boat. You tell yourself you're being strategic, mature, responsible. But deep down, you know what's really happening. You're being domesticated. This isn't just a corporate tactic. It's how power works across the board. Governments use tax breaks, public recognition, and tiny privileges to foster allegiance. Social media platforms offer you likes and visibility in exchange for conformity. Even personal relationships can drip benefits, approval, affection, validation to keep you compliant. Because when control looks like reward, resistance feels like betrayal. And if you try to walk away, if you question the game, you don't just lose the perks, you risk being labeled ungrateful, disloyal, difficult. That's the genius of drip benefits. They make greed look like growth. They make manipulation feel like motivation. And over time, they distort your sense of what you actually need. You forget what life felt like before the rewards, before the perks, before you started chasing approval like oxygen. You begin to believe that without the drip, you'd be nothing, that your worth is measured by what's given to you, not what you are without it. But ask yourself this: when was the last time you made a choice without calculating the reward? When was the last time you said no to something that promised more? When did you last act purely on principle, not potential gain? Because the truth is this: the more you rely on drip benefits to feel successful, the easier you are to control. The more you chase small rewards, the further you drift from real freedom. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. You don't feel trapped. You feel privileged. You feel lucky. You feel like you're winning, when in reality, you're being led by greed, fueled by crumbs, kept quiet by comfort. It starts with a question. A small, piercing question meant to expose a crack in the surface. Something like, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Or, "Are you sure that's what really happened?" But before you can even process the question, before your mind has time to trace its meaning, you're hit with something unexpected, a compliment. Honestly, I don't even know how you handle all of this so well. Suddenly, the ground beneath you feels softer, less hostile. The question fades into the background, overtaken by warmth, gratitude, approval. And that's the trick. This isn't a mistake. It's not kindness. It's strategy. Interrupting questions with praise is one of the most disarming forms of manipulation because it confuses the emotional terrain. Your defenses, which naturally rise in response to confrontation, are cut down by a sudden flood of validation. Praise short-circuits the brain's threat detection. It flips the conversation from defense to trust in a single breath. And once that trust is triggered, you're no longer analyzing the question. You're just grateful someone sees your struggle. This technique is subtle, elegant, and disturbingly effective. Because it doesn't just distract, it rewires your emotional state. A difficult question becomes an opportunity to feel seen, to feel understood. And in that moment of emotional relief, you offer more than just answers. You offer vulnerability. The manipulator knows this. That's the point. Praise is their scalpel. Praise is their scalpel. It allows them to slice past your skepticism, to access your truth without resistance. They don't need to force honesty out of you. They make you want to give it freely. And here's where it gets more dangerous. Over time, you start associating interrogation with validation. You start to crave their questions, Not because they're harmless, but because they come wrapped in emotional candy. You mistake their interest for intimacy. You confuse manipulation for connection. And so you open up, again and again, offering your thoughts, your fears, your secrets, gifts wrapped in self-deception. Now imagine this technique applied not just in personal relationships, but by leaders, influencers, even entire systems. Think about politicians who begin tough interviews with praise for the questioner, or employers who open performance reviews with glowing compliments before slipping in criticisms that would otherwise sting. It's everywhere, and because it feels good, we rarely question it. But praise in this context isn't about you, it's about control. Because praise doesn't always lead to empowerment. Often, it leads to compliance. You don't push back as hard when you feel appreciated. You don't resist as strongly when someone recognizes your effort. The more validated you feel, the less likely you are to detect manipulation. The praise becomes a mask. The question, a blade hidden beneath it. And it works even better when you're exhausted. When life has worn you down, when your self-worth is low and your boundaries are cracked. In those moments, praise becomes addictive. Like a drug, one hit and you're hooked. One kind word in the middle of a hard conversation, and you'll do anything to keep that feeling going. Even if it means giving more than you should. Even if it means staying silent when you should speak. So what do? You learn to see it. You train yourself to notice the timing, the rhythm, the dance of question and praise. You become suspicious, not of compliments themselves, but of compliments that come wrapped around discomfort, that arrive not as gifts, but as shields. You ask why this praise, right now? What are they trying to soften? What are they trying to slip past me? And more importantly, you remind yourself that real praise doesn't manipulate. Real validation doesn't interrupt discomfort. It walks with it. It doesn't redirect your attention. It honors it. Anyone who truly values you won't use kindness to dull your instincts. They'll trust your strength to hear the truth. Because manipulation dressed as praise is still manipulation. And when you learn to hear the question underneath the compliment, when you refuse to trade clarity for comfort, you take your power back. You don't need praise to answer a question. Honestly, you need awareness to know when the question isn't honest in return. You're in a room with no doors. At least that's how it feels. You don't panic yet. You look for windows, seams, cracks. You run your hands along the walls, search for a way out, but nothing gives. There's light, there's air, but no exits. And then gradually, you stop searching. You sit down. You tell yourself it's fine. Maybe you never really needed to leave anyway. This is the psychological foundation of control. Eliminate the concept of exit, not the actual exits, just the belief that one exists. It's far more effective. See, humans can endure a great deal, pain, injustice, even enslavement, so long as they believe escape is possible. That sliver of hope keeps them alive, motivated, dangerous. But remove the belief in an exit, and people adapt, they settle, they reframe their cage as comfort. They convince themselves they never wanted freedom to begin with. This is how systems control you, not with brute force, but with psychological architecture. A job you can't leave because now isn't the right time. A relationship that drains you, but feels too familiar to question. A city that suffocates you, but you stay because you have roots here. These are not physical traps, they're cognitive ones. Invisible, but devastating. The system doesn't need to lock every door. It just needs to teach you that trying is pointless. And over time it works. You stop dreaming of a different life because imagining alternatives becomes painful. You silence that small voice that asks for more. Instead, you rationalize. You call your paralysis stability. You call your resignation maturity. And the worst part, you reward yourself for adapting. But deep down, something aches. Because your mind wasn't built for cages. It was built for movement, for possibility. And when the exit concept dies, something in you starts to decay. You become predictable, safe, harmless, which is exactly what they want. Institutions, whether corporate, educational, religious, or governmental, thrive when exit concepts vanish. A worker who doesn't believe in better jobs won't ask for a raise. A citizen who sees no alternative system won't demand revolution. A believer who fears questioning won't challenge doctrine. Remove exit concepts, and you remove resistance. You turn potential rebels into loyal consumers, activists into spectators, dreamers into bureaucrats, and they don't even notice. That's the brilliance of it. You don't have to imprison someone who's convinced they're already free. You just have to manage their perception of choice. Give them controlled outlets, a promotion here, a vacation there, the illusion of change without actual movement. These are psychological pacifiers, just enough to keep the hunger for escape quiet, but never satisfied. Eventually, the question isn't, why don't they leave? It's what would they even leave to? That's when the system wins. Not because it crushed you, but because it convinced you to stop looking. So how do you fight back? You resurrect the exit concept, not with reckless action, but with radical imagination. You challenge the idea that this is all there is. You plant mental seeds of elsewhere, of otherwise, of more. You ask forbidden questions. You entertain impossible ideas. You let discomfort grow, not as an enemy, but as proof you're still alive. Because the most dangerous person in a controlled system isn't the one with weapons. It's the one who still believes there's a door. You're not invited, you're chosen. That's the difference. Exclusive clubs don't just keep people out, they keep people desperate to get in. The velvet rope, the hidden door, the members-only code, it all sends one hypnotic message. You are less than until we say otherwise. Now imagine a club so secretive, so elite, you don't even know what it takes to qualify. The rules aren't posted. The members don't advertise. And yet, everyone you admire seems to already be inside. Celebrities, influencers, the powerful, laughing, glowing, hinting at something just out of reach. The illusion is simple but devastating. If you're not part of this, you must be doing something wrong. And that illusion, it's engineered. This tactic plays on a psychological vulnerability wired into your brain, the fear of exclusion. Evolution built it into you. To be excluded from the tribe once meant death, no shelter, no food, no safety. So now, thousands of years later, your nervous system still interprets social exclusion as a threat. Anxiety, insecurity, shame, they all flare up at the mere hint of not belonging. And that's exactly what the club creators exploit. But here's the sinister part. The club doesn't really exist. Not in any tangible way. It's manufactured through branding, through scarcity, through vague language that always implies you're one step away, but never quite enough. There's no clear path to admission, and that's the point. Because when the goal is undefined, your efforts to reach it become endless. They create the fear. You supply the obsession. This is the dark genius of exclusivity. As control, it's not about keeping you out. It's about making you volunteer your own captivity. You mimic the behaviors, you follow the trends, adopt the lingo, worship the members, you self-regulate, you self-censor. You become who they want you to be, not out of force, but out of fear that you'll never be accepted otherwise. And slowly, almost invisibly, your identity erodes. You no longer act from desire, but from anxiety. Your choices are filtered through one desperate question. Will this get me in? Will this finally make me enough? Even worse, the fear of losing your spot, real or imagined, keeps you loyal. The club doesn't just manipulate outsiders, it controls insiders too. Because once you believe you're inside, you'll do anything to stay. You'll defend the system, gatekeep others, police yourself. You'll become a guardian of the very thing that enslaved you. And this tactic isn't just used by social elites or lifestyle brands. Institutions use it. Corporations use it. Cults, religions, political movements, they all manufacture exclusivity to create allegiance. To belong, you must sacrifice time, money, autonomy. And the deeper you go, the more you're terrified of being cast out. Why? Because exclusion doesn't just hurt, it invalidates. It says your value is conditional, your worth must be earned. And that idea burrows into your psyche like a parasite. But here's the brutal truth. They never want you to realize the club only has power because you believe it does. The door was never locked. The membership never mattered. The fear you feel, that's the real product. That's what they're selling. And once you stop chasing it, once you stop needing their approval, you become ungovernable, unshaped, free. So ask yourself, who benefits from your exclusion? Who profits when you feel inferior, anxious, desperate to be let in? And who would lose their grip the moment you stopped caring? The club isn't real, but the control it has over you, that's real enough to ruin your life. Until you break the spell, you were never outside, you were just convinced you didn't belong. They don't raise their voice, they don't make demands, they smile, they listen, they give. And somehow they always seem to get exactly what they want. You've met someone like this, haven't you? The person who seems endlessly kind, overwhelmingly generous, impossibly understanding. At first you admire them, then you trust them. And before long, you find yourself saying yes to things you never meant to agree to. Doing favors you wouldn't do for anyone else. Sacrificing time, energy, even values, because how could you say no to someone so nice? That's the trap. Not all manipulation is cruel. Some of it is wrapped in warmth, smothered in charm, sweetened with compassion. It doesn't strike, it invites. It doesn't pressure, it nurtures. And yet, its outcome is the same as any overt coercion. You do what they want, often without realizing whose idea it really was. This is the honey trap with kindness. You see, we're wired to respond to kindness with trust. It's ancient, evolutionary. Acts of generosity signaled safety, alliance, mutual care. So when someone showers us with empathy, attention, affection, we lean in, we let our guard down, we reciprocate. That's the key. Not because we're weak, but because reciprocity is human instinct. If someone gives us something, we feel obligated to give something back. And the honey trap exploits that instinct with surgical precision. The kind manipulator doesn't push, they offer. They give first a favor, a compliment, an unsolicited gift. You didn't ask, but it felt good, didn't it? And now, without being told, without being forced, you feel something stir inside, the urge to return the favor. That's how it begins. But then the requests come. Small at first, a little errand, a small sacrifice. Something just this once, but each time you agree, the requests grow, they escalate, and the more you comply, the harder it becomes to stop. Because now you're invested. Now saying no feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of yourself, but of them. And that's the most brilliant part. The honey trap doesn't demand obedience. It creates the illusion that obedience is your idea. You don't feel manipulated. You feel noble, helpful, loyal. And because the manipulator never loses their gentle tone, their generous spirit, you never suspect their intentions. In fact, if you ever did push back, just a little, you'd be met with disappointment, not anger, a quiet sigh, a hurt look, a soft, "I thought I could count on you." It cuts deeper than rage ever could. You question yourself. Wonder if you're being selfish, ungrateful. After all, haven't they always been good to you? Haven't they always been there? Slowly, your sense of boundaries dissolves, not because someone broke them, but because you handed them over. And this form of control, it's almost invisible. That's what makes it so dangerous. We're trained to look for threats in aggression, in domination, in force. But rarely do we question the smiling faces, the soft voices, the endless praise. But ask yourself, is their kindness truly unconditional? Or does it disappear the moment you assert yourself? That's the test. Real kindness doesn't vanish when you say no. Real compassion doesn't punish independence. But the honey trap, it feeds on your inability to walk away. It rewards your compliance with more affection, more praise, more warmth, until you forget where your will ends and theirs begins. And don't think this only happens in toxic relationships. It happens at work, in families, in friendships, even in politics, leaders who charm rather than coerce, bosses who empower while quietly exploiting, parents who smother their children in love to ensure obedience. Kindness becomes a currency, not of connection, but of control. So what do? You learn to distinguish real kindness from strategic generosity. You ask yourself, does this person respect my? Do I feel free around them? Or do I feel indebted, manipulated, bound by invisible strings, disguised as care? Because sometimes the sweetest poison is offered with a smile, and the cost of swallowing it is yourself. You're in a cold room. A single light bulb swings above your head, casting erratic shadows on the walls. A chair waits in the center, empty, silent. And then someone gestures to it. "Take a seat," they say. But they don't force you. They don't threaten you. They just wait, patient, calm. That's how it starts. This is what control looks like when it's done right. It doesn't feel like force. It feels like invitation. It feels like choice. But it's not your choice. Not really. It's curated, engineered. You were always meant to sit down. You just had to think it was your idea. Tell me what happened. It's soft, gentle, not a demand, an invitation. That's the brilliance of it. You're not coerced. You're coaxed, nudged, encouraged to spill your thoughts, confess your feelings, expose your secrets, and the more you talk, the deeper the trap sets in. Because once you confess, they don't need to control you. You'll do it yourself. You think confessions are about truth, but they're about leverage. Every admission you make is a seed, small, seemingly harmless, but they grow, they become evidence, they become ammunition. You think you're unburdening yourself. In reality, you're handing someone else the map to your psyche. It works because you're human. You crave validation. You want to be understood. And when someone finally listens, truly listens, you drop your guard. That's when it happens. That's when you give them the very thing they'll use to own you. Think about therapy. Think about those quiet one-on-one conversations. Think about the person who says, "You can trust me." Not all of them mean harm, but the method is the same. They let you speak. And once you've spoken, you've exposed your vulnerabilities, your traumas, your fears, all labeled, all catalogued. And if they wanted to, they could break you with it. Now consider interrogation tactics. Not screaming, not threats, but empathy, understanding. They offer you water. They say, "We get it. Just talk to us." And you do. Because when the invitation feels like kindness, your resistance feels like rudeness. It's social engineering, masked as compassion. It's control that feels like comfort. Confession isn't always verbal. Sometimes it's digital. That app that asks how you're feeling. That quiz that learns your personality. That post you made during a bad day. Data is confession in disguise. You pour your thoughts into a machine, believing it's harmless. But every algorithm is listening, learning, profiling. The more you reveal, the easier you are to control. And the worst part, you often invite it. You seek the relief that comes with telling your story, unaware that you're also surrendering power. You feel lighter after you talk. But the room remembers, the system remembers, and it never forgets. Even in relationships, how many times have you been encouraged to open up? Be honest. Tell me how you really feel. It sounds supportive, but not all ears are safe. Some collect your confessions not to heal you, but to hold you hostage later. Emotional ammunition, stored for future use, because once you confess, you lose ambiguity. You lose the right to be unreadable. And once someone knows how you work, what you fear, what you regret, what you crave, they know exactly which strings to pull. You become a puppet, draped in transparency. So the next time someone invites you to confess, ask yourself, are they seeking understanding or seeking control? Are you speaking to be free or to be owned? Because not every open ear is a safe place. Not every invitation is a kindness. And not every confession is a path to healing. Sometimes it's just a leash you tie around your own neck, willingly, lovingly, thinking it's liberation, when really it's surrender. You're in a meeting. Someone interrupts you mid-sentence again. They smile, maybe even chuckle, as if it's harmless. Later, a colleague mispronounces your name, not just once, but every time they speak it. They never ask how to say it right. Another person jokes about where you're from, implying it's strange, exotic, other. And when you try to speak up, they say you're being too sensitive, that it's just a joke. Now pause. Really think about what's happening. No one shouted. No one used slurs. No one made a direct threat. But somehow you feel smaller, less certain, a little more invisible. This is the insidious genius of the microaggression. It's subtle. It's deniable. It's a cut so small you almost convince yourself it didn't happen. But these cuts don't heal. They multiply. And eventually they bleed you dry. Microaggressions are like invisible gas. You don't see them. You barely smell them. But they fill the room. And slowly they suffocate. And here's the terrifying part. Because they're so minor on the surface, they're easy to dismiss. Easy for others to ignore. But their power doesn't come from intensity. It comes from repetition. From normalization. From the way they slowly recalibrate your sense of reality. You start to doubt yourself. Was that comment racist, sexist, ableist, or just awkward? Are you overreacting? Should you just laugh it off? The longer this continues, the more you begin to shrink your own voice. You adjust your behavior to avoid conflict. You become less. You become manageable. That's not an accident. That's the function. Microaggressions are not just passive slips of the tongue, they are tactical. Whether consciously or not, they serve to reinforce a social hierarchy, one where the dominant group stays dominant without ever having to raise their voice. They normalize inequality through everyday politeness. They're like sandpaper to the soul, grinding down confidence, agency, and self-worth in a way that leaves no obvious bruises, just the deep, slow erosion of identity. And when you finally explode, when the weight becomes too much, and you demand respect, the world looks at you like you've gone too far, overreacted. Now you're the problem. Because that's the ultimate manipulation. The abuse disguises itself as civility, and your resistance is reframed as aggression. So the cycle continues. Subtle disrespect, gaslit reactions, internalized doubt, and slowly the target becomes what they've been treated as: inferior, angry, irrational. This is how control works in modern systems, not through force, but friction. Not through open hostility, but quiet dismissal. Not with chains, but with constant reminders of your place. Microaggressions teach you that your discomfort is a threat to the group, that your truth is too loud, that your pain is inconvenient. And when enough people absorb that lesson, the abuser doesn't have to raise their hand anymore. The group does it for them, through silence, through laughter, through just playing devil's advocate. And so abuse becomes culture. Microaggressions are not micro, they are the foundation. They prepare the soil for bigger harms. They signal who's safe to mistreat, who's expected to endure, who won't be believed when they finally speak up. And because they seem so minor, they're nearly impossible to call out without being labeled dramatic, combative, or divisive. That's not coincidence. That's the trap. Because the moment you try to hold the system accountable, the system uses your reaction as proof that it doesn't need to change. The status quo defends itself by pathologizing your pain. And suddenly, the conversation isn't about the harm that was done. It's about how calmly you can describe it, how professionally you can package your trauma, how gently you can ask not to be erased. You're not just expected to survive abuse, you're expected to make it comfortable for everyone else. That's how microaggressions work. That's how they win. Not by screaming, but by whispering. Not by attacking, but by nudging. And when no one pushes back, they become normal. And when they're normal, the abuse becomes invisible. And when abuse becomes invisible, no one sees it until it's too late. Until the damage is already done. Until you've forgotten who you were before the system taught you to be small. That's why microaggressions matter. Not because they hurt, but because they teach you to stop fighting, to stop speaking, to stop existing fully. And in the silence that follows, control settles in, quiet, polite, permanent. You're halfway through an impossible task. The job isn't just hard, it's intentionally designed that way. The deadline shifts. The expectations blur. The rules, once clear, now move like fog. And just as you're about to finish, just as you're about to deliver, they ask for something else, something new, something different. Welcome to the tactic of goal shifting. At first, it feels like miscommunication, a simple misunderstanding. You think, maybe I just didn't get it right the first time. So you adjust, you work harder, you stay late, sacrifice your peace, all to deliver what they now say they want. But then it happens again. The target moves once more, and then again, and again. This isn't incompetence, it's a weapon. Shifting goals while you deliver isn't just frustrating, it's a method of control. It keeps you off balance. If the target keeps changing, you never feel complete. You never feel good enough. Your mind stays locked in a loop of anxious striving, always chasing, never arriving. The brilliance of this tactic is that it doesn't scream abuse. It whispers instability. It creates the illusion that you're the problem, that you didn't listen closely enough, work hard enough, care deeply enough. You internalize the failure. You apologize when you shouldn't. You overextend. You burn out. It happens in workplaces, masked as agile strategy or creative iteration. The boss praises your dedication, then asks for revisions that contradict everything they approved yesterday. You deliver excellence, and they respond with, "This is great, but what we really need is..." And so your reality bends. You chase validation that's always just out of reach. It happens in relationships too. One day you're told you're perfect, everything they've ever wanted. The next you're criticized for the very traits they once adored. You try harder, change more, shrink yourself to fit the shifting silhouette of who they claim they need. Until eventually, you forget who you were before all the changing began. This tactic is effective because it taps into one of your deepest fears, the fear of not being enough. Humans crave closure. We want to know when we've done the job right, when the task is complete. But when the finish line keeps moving, you're trapped in a state of psychological limbo, never sure, always doubting, perpetually striving. And here's the dark genius of it. You become easier to control the harder you try. The more effort you pour in, the more invested you become. The more invested you become, the harder it is to walk away. They don't need to threaten or manipulate directly. They just keep changing the rules, knowing you'll exhaust yourself trying to win a game that cannot be won. At some point, you stop noticing the absurdity. You adapt. You start expecting the shift. You begin to plan for it, sacrificing precision for flexibility, depth for speed. You become the perfect pawn, hyper-efficient, emotionally drained, and terrified of failure. But the worst part, you start to believe this is normal, that life is just a series of unfinished tasks and broken expectations, that you are supposed to feel this uncertain, this inadequate, this lost. So ask yourself, whose goal are you chasing right now? Is it even real? Or has it changed so many times you no longer recognize its shape? To escape, you have to stop running toward approval that keeps backing away. You have to stop treating every new request as a reflection of your worth. You have to see the shift for what it is. Not a test of your value, but a tactic to steal your power. Because the moment you realize the target was never meant to be reached, the moment you stop running, you stop being controlled. And suddenly, you're not chasing a ghost anymore. You're standing still, clear-eyed, watching them shift the goal again. Only this time, you don't move. You don't adjust. You let them flail in their manipulation, while you reclaim the one thing they were trying to steal. Your sense of enough, they don't control you. Not anymore, because now you see the trick. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. It starts with something that doesn't seem sinister at all. A set time for breakfast. A bell for lunch. A communal dinner with strict start and stop times. It feels organized, maybe even nurturing. But hidden beneath this routine is a psychological trap, one that's been used in schools, prisons, militaries, and cults for centuries. Control the meal times, and you don't just control someone's stomach, you control their mind. Because eating is primal. It's one of the few things every human must do regularly to survive. When you take that need and regiment it, schedule it, gate it, you're creating dependency. You're silently teaching the body and brain that sustenance isn't a right, it's a privilege granted by authority. And here's where it gets darker. When someone else decides when you can eat, your perception of autonomy begins to fade. You may not notice it immediately, but over time, your internal clock, your gut instinct, starts to align not with your hunger, but with someone else's schedule. You stop asking yourself, am I hungry? And start wondering, is it? This isn't accidental. It's conditioning, and it's incredibly effective. Think about how schools function. From the moment you're 5 years old, you're taught not to eat when you're hungry, but when the bell rings. Your body's signals are muted by arbitrary rules. Then in the workplace, it continues. Lunch breaks at noon, 15-minute coffee breaks, dinner squeezed in around deadlines. Hunger becomes something external, managed by policy, not instinct. And the psychological consequences, they run deep, because once a person stops listening to their own body, their own needs, their own rhythms, they become easier to manipulate in every other domain. Because food isn't just fuel, it's comfort, it's pleasure, it's identity. In families, in culture, in religion, meals are sacred. So when those meals are regulated, interrupted, or withheld, it's not just physical control, it's emotional leverage. That's why authoritarian systems love controlling food. In prisons, meal times are fixed and inflexible. In cults, food is rationed or ritualized. In military training, eating becomes a function of obedience, not nourishment. And in every one of those examples, the goal is the same: break the individual's will and replace it with dependency. You might think you're free because you can grab a snack whenever you want. But pause for a second. When was the last time you ate because you were truly hungry, not because the clock said so? How often do you override your own body because the schedule demands it? The more we internalize externally imposed rhythms, the more we lose touch with ourselves. And when someone's out of sync with their own needs, they become disoriented, disempowered, submissive. There's another layer: when someone else controls when you eat, they also control when you don't. Skipped meals become punishment. Delayed meals become behavioral correction. It doesn't need to be physical abuse to be abuse. Hunger is quiet, invisible, and brutally persuasive. You might comply not because you're convinced, but because you're depleted. Your resistance isn't crushed, it's starved. And here's the real horror: most people never question it. They don't see the trap, because it's wrapped in routine, discipline, normalcy. But control doesn't always wear a uniform or hold a weapon. Sometimes it holds a spoon. The people who orchestrate this know exactly what they're doing. Hunger makes people anxious. Predictability around food creates gratitude. Gratitude becomes compliance. And compliance, over time, feels like choice, even when it's anything but. It's easy to think you're immune. But consider this. If you can't eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired, or speak when you're hurt, how free are you, really? Control the meal times, and you don't need to raise your voice or brandish a threat. You just wait. Eventually, even the strongest hunger for freedom gets quieter than the hunger for food. You're at a car dealership. The salesman leans in with a smile, glancing at his watch like time is slipping through his fingers. "This deal," he says, "is only good for today." Suddenly, you feel the clock ticking. Not just on a car, but on your judgment, on your freedom to decide. You weren't planning to buy, but now it feels like you have to. This is the promise of the time-limited offer. It's not about the product, it's about control. Psychological control. Time pressure activates a primal urgency in your brain, the fear of missing out, of being left behind, of making the wrong choice by doing nothing. And when your brain feels rushed, it stops thinking critically. It defaults to instinct, to emotion. You don't evaluate, you react. Retailers, marketers, even manipulators in your personal life know this. It's why flash sales exist, why countdown timers pop up on websites, why someone says, "I won't wait forever." They're not offering you a chance, they're triggering your fear of regret. Because here's what happens when time is limited: your internal narrative changes. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and start asking, "What if I lose this?" Scarcity hijacks your value system. The product becomes more desirable simply because it might disappear. Its absence creates more emotion than its presence ever could. This tactic doesn't just sell shoes or subscriptions, it sells commitments. It sells silence. It sells surrender. Think about the job offer that gives you 24 hours to decide, no time to reflect, no chance to weigh your options. Think about the partner who says, "If you don't want this now, I'm leaving." Or the friend who pressures you into decisions by pretending urgency. It's never just about the deadline. It's about rushing you past your boundaries, bypassing your intuition. Urgency creates obedience. It shrinks the space between stimulus and response until there's no room left for resistance. And worse, it shifts responsibility. If the decision turns out badly, you're not angry at the manipulator. You're angry at yourself. Why didn't I think it through? Why did I rush? The shame isn't theirs. It's yours. That's the genius of the time-limited offer. It makes you the architect of your own regret. But here's what's even more sinister. Sometimes the deadline was never real. The offer would have been there tomorrow. The person would have waited. The pressure was a performance, a script, a tool to move you like a pawn. And by the time you realize it, you've already played your part. This tactic works so well because it doesn't need to convince you logically. It just needs to make you afraid. Afraid to wait, to pause, to think. And in that fear, it installs a false urgency that overrides your better judgment. You start to believe that acting fast is the same as acting smart, that seizing the moment is strength. But impulsivity isn't power, it's vulnerability dressed in adrenaline. So ask yourself, when someone gives you a deadline, who really benefits from the speed? What are they hoping you won't notice? What truths get buried under the ticking clock? Because if someone truly believes in what they're offering, they'll let you think. They'll let you breathe. Pressure is not proof. It's a trap. The time-limited offer is a mirror. It reflects not just manipulation, but your susceptibility to it. It reveals how easily urgency can seduce you into obedience, into compromise, into forgetting that time, when weaponized, is just another tool of control. And if you're not careful, you won't just lose the offer. You'll lose the part of yourself that hesitates, that questions, that resists. And that part, that hesitation, that is your power. Don't give it away. Not for a deal, not for a threat, not for anything that can't wait. You walk into a store, the lights are warm, the air smells faintly of citrus and polished wood, and everything looks effortless. You're offered a free sample, a friendly smile, maybe even a limited time discount. You make a purchase, it feels like a win, low effort, immediate gratification, no obvious downside. But what you don't see is the trap being laid with every swipe of your card. Because in systems of manipulation, the first rule is simple: never show the full price up front. This isn't just about shopping, it's about life, about how you're nudged, coaxed, and maneuvered into decisions that seem harmless at first, only to reveal their real cost once you're too far in to walk away. Think about student loans. You're told it's an investment, the golden ticket to a brighter future. You sign papers at 18, barely an adult, with no real understanding of interest rates, compounding debt, or economic downturns. Years later, you're drowning in monthly payments. And by then, the system has what it wants: decades of labor locked in, powered by your desperation not to fall behind or consider relationships. You meet someone new. They're charming, attentive, maybe even a little too perfect. You get drawn in, slowly, subtly. Then the demands start. Little things at first: your time, your loyalty, your silence. And when the emotional toll begins to mount, when the pressure becomes suffocating, you're already tangled in the web. You've invested too much to back out without loss. The emotional price tag was hidden until it wasn't. This tactic, delayed disclosure, is everywhere. Jobs that promise flexibility but expect your soul. Diets that promise transformation but demand obsession. Apps that are free until your privacy becomes currency. The real cost always comes later, and that's by design. Because if they showed you the full burden up front, you'd never say yes. That's the genius of manipulation. Make the initial choice look easy, rational, safe. The catch: you're not just buying a product, you're buying into a system, a cycle, a contract that binds you in ways you didn't anticipate. It's not just psychological, it's neurological. Your brain loves immediate rewards. Dopamine spikes when you say yes to the now, even if it means suffering later. The manipulator knows this, so they front-load the pleasure and back-load the pain. They count on your short-term bias. They count on your fatigue. They count on the fact that by the time you realize what you've agreed to, you'll be too entangled, too ashamed, or too tired to fight back. Even the language plays along. Introductory offer, trial period, low monthly payments. These phrases are designed to soothe you into compliance. They lull your critical thinking to sleep. They whisper, "You can handle this," when what they mean is, you won't see what's coming. And if you do try to walk away, that's when the penalties kick in. The late fees, the cancellation charges, the social fallout, the guilt. Every exit is booby-trapped. The longer you stay, the more it costs to leave. That's how control works in the modern world. Not with chains, but with contracts. Not with threats, but with terms and conditions. You don't need to be forced when you can be persuaded. You don't need to be imprisoned when you willingly walk into the cage. And here's the most dangerous part. This method doesn't just manipulate you, it trains you. You begin to expect hidden costs. You begin to doubt simplicity. You begin to internalize the idea that every good thing comes with a price you won't understand until it's too late. And so you stop resisting. You stop questioning. You accept that this is just how things work. But that's not acceptance. It's surrender. The only defense is awareness. To question the easy yes. To pause when something seems too painless, too perfect, too immediate. You're not manipulated through facts. You're manipulated through feelings, and the easiest feeling to weaponize is insecurity, not your beliefs, not your values, but that quiet voice inside your head that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not worthy enough. That's the pressure point. And once someone finds it, they don't need chains to control you, just a whisper. Think about the last time you doubted yourself. That moment of hesitation when someone gave you a look or offered unsolicited advice that felt more like a judgment. It wasn't the words that hurt, it was the echo they found inside you. The echo of a belief you already carried, quietly, painfully, and alone. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't invent your insecurities, it just plays them back to you, louder. This is the secret of the most effective manipulators. They mirror your worst thoughts. They don't argue with you. They agree with your fears. They validate the voice that says, "You're not enough." And suddenly, they feel like the only honest voice in your life, the only one who really sees you. That kind of validation isn't empowering. It's parasitic. Once they have your insecurity in their hand, they can squeeze. Just enough to make you squirm. Just enough to make you try harder. Work more. Apologize when you've done nothing wrong. Buy things you don't need. Chase approval like a starving animal. Insecurity doesn't just make you vulnerable. It makes you obedient. Look at how marketing works. Maids don't sell you products. They sell you inadequacy. You're too pale, too dark, too old, too fat, too skinny, too loud, too quiet. The solution is always the same. Buy this, change that, hide this, fix that. The message isn't that you're okay. It's that you're almost okay if you just spend a little more, conform a little harder, disappear a little better. Politicians do it too. They'll tell you you're losing, that you're being replaced, that someone else is taking what's rightfully yours. They target the parts of your identity that already feel fragile, your job, your community, your heritage, and whisper just loud enough for your fear to drown out your reason. You're not being informed, you're being agitated. Even in personal relationships, the same playbook applies. The manipulative partner doesn't always insult you outright. They make suggestions, little hints. You look tired. Are you really wearing that? I don't think you're cut out for that kind of job. And slowly, you internalize the narrative that you are lucky to be with them, that no one else would put up with you, that you're flawed, and only they are gracious enough to love you anyway. But here's the cruel twist. The more you try to prove your worth, the more power you give away. You believe the only escape is perfection, when the truth is, perfection is the prison. Because perfection isn't achievable. It's a goalpost that keeps moving every time you get close. And the people pulling the strings, they make sure it stays just out of reach. So you work harder. You say yes when you want to say no. You laugh at jokes that hurt you. You tolerate disrespect, hoping that if you just endure long enough, you'll finally be accepted. But acceptance isn't the prize, it's the bait. And the trap is your silence. Because the deeper the insecurity, the more ashamed you are to name it. And shame thrives in secrecy. The less you speak your truth, the more someone else speaks it for you. They narrate your story, define your identity, decide your value, and you let them, because you're too afraid your truth might confirm their lie. But here's the truth. They don't want you to realize your insecurities are not flaws, they're fingerprints. Proof that you've lived, hurt, hoped, failed, and kept going. The more you try to erase them, the more you erase yourself. And that's exactly what control wants, to make you smaller, quieter, easier to move around. The antidote to this isn't self-esteem, it's self-recognition. It's not about feeling amazing all the time. It's about being aware, seeing the strings, noticing the cues, and understanding when your feelings are being used against you. Because once you see the game, you don't play harder. You stop playing altogether. You stop explaining your worth to people who profit from your doubt. You stop letting strangers script your identity. You stop flinching when someone presses a bruise they didn't earn the right to touch. They will play on your insecurities. That part you can't stop. What if I asked you this? How did someone as insightful as you get to be so emotionally intelligent? Seems like a compliment, doesn't it? But something strange just happened, because while your brain felt flattered, your guard quietly dropped, and now you're more likely to agree, to explain, to reveal, and to comply. That's the sinister beauty of a flattering question. Unlike compliments, which are easily recognized as manipulation, flattering questions slip beneath your defenses. They disguise praise as curiosity. They make you feel seen, special, validated, not by being told something good, but by being asked something that assumes it's already true. And in that moment of validation, you become vulnerable. Think about job interviews. What do you think makes you such a strong leader? The question presumes you're already one. It flatters you, nudging you to live up to the image it projects. You don't want to contradict it. You want to affirm it, to prove it right, so you start talking, and revealing more than you intended. It doesn't stop at the workplace. Flattering questions appear in relationships, in politics, in marketing. Why do you always know the right thing to say? How did you get to be so understanding? What inspired you to be so generous? Each question feels like praise, but every one of them is a leash, gently guiding your behavior. Why does it work so well? Because humans crave affirmation. We want to be seen in a positive light. And when someone implies we already embody a virtue, we subconsciously work to reinforce that perception. We start aligning our behavior with the compliment. Even if it's untrue, we cooperate, we comply, but it goes deeper. Flattering questions don't just influence behavior, they manipulate identity. They don't just ask what you do, they ask who you are. And if you accept the premise of the question, you're rewriting your self-image. You become the generous one, the smart one, the loyal one. And the more you internalize that label, the more invested you become in maintaining it, even at your own expense. Consider a manipulative partner asking, "Why are you always so patient with me, even when I mess up?" It sounds sweet, but it's a trap. Because now if you get upset later, you're not just expressing anger, you're contradicting the very identity they crafted for you. And you feel guilty, so you suppress it. You become the patient one again, because it's easier than breaking the illusion. This is how flattering questions control you, by handing you a flattering mask and watching you choose to wear it. Even more disturbing, you probably won't even notice. You'll walk away from the conversation, feeling good, appreciated, understood. Meanwhile, they got what they wanted. Your agreement, your compliance, your silence, all wrapped in the soft velvet of praise. That's the most unethical part. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like connection. Now ask yourself, how many times have you been guided this way? How many decisions were influenced not by logic or pressure, but by your desire to live up to a flattering question? How often have you agreed, revealed, conceded, just to protect a compliment someone never even said outright? And if you can't remember, that's not a sign you're safe. It's a sign it's working. Because the most effective control doesn't come from force. It comes from flattery. And the moment you start defending the person flattering you, that's when you know they're already inside your head. So the next time someone asks you a flattering question, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits if I accept this version of me? What are they really trying to get me to do? Flattery, that sounds like a question, isn't just kind, it's a calculated lie, wearing your ego like a mask. You're scrolling through your phone when you see it. A video clip, just a few seconds long, already going viral. A public figure stands behind a podium, eyes downcast, voice trembling, apologizing, not just for what they did, but for how it made people feel. The crowd doesn't just want remorse. They want collapse. They want tears. They want blood. But what exactly are they apologizing for? At first, it looks like justice, a reckoning, someone in power being held accountable. But stay with it long enough, and something shifts. The apology becomes less about truth and more about survival, less about reflection and more about submission. A performance, not a confession. A ritual, not a resolution. This is the spectacle of forced public apologies. They don't exist to heal. They exist to humiliate. To bend a person so far that the audience feels taller by comparison. It's not justice, it's dominance, and it works frighteningly well, because when someone is made to apologize under pressure, the meaning collapses. Sincerity dies the moment it's demanded. It's control. Forced public apologies are designed to extract compliance through shame. And shame is the most effective leash you can place around someone's psyche. Unlike guilt, which comes from within, shame is imposed. It doesn't care about context. It doesn't need facts. It just needs an audience hungry for repentance. And the scariest part, the audience almost always gets what it wants, because humans are wired to avoid social rejection. We'd rather lie than be cast out, rather weep on camera than be digitally exiled. So we perform the apology, even when we're not sorry, especially when we're not sorry. Because in today's culture, innocence doesn't protect you. Only submission does. Think about it. The language of these apologies is nearly identical. I now realize my words were hurtful. I understand the pain I've caused. This is a learning opportunity. It's a script. And when everyone reads from the same script, the words lose their weight. But it gets darker. These rituals aren't confined to celebrities. They're creeping into everyday life. A student forced to apologize for an opinion. A worker dragged into HR to atone for an offhand comment. A friend cornered into admitting harm just to restore peace. The apology becomes less about reconciliation, more about containment. It doesn't fix the problem. It silences the person. This isn't about accountability. Accountability invites dialogue, growth, nuance. Forced apologies offer none of that. They flatten complexity into a binary, you're wrong, and now you must confess, or be punished. And here's where the control gets surgical. Once someone has been broken into apologizing, they're marked. Their credibility drops. Their self-image cracks. They're easier to manipulate, easier to discard, easier to use as a warning to others. Step out of line and you'll end up like them. It's psychological warfare disguised as social justice, a subtle form of obedience training. It doesn't start with threats, it starts with praise. They tell you how loyal you are, how dependable, how deeply valued. They wrap their demands in the language of love, calling it family, team, community, and slowly, quietly, they begin to expect that loyalty to become absolute, unconditional. At first it feels good. There's something seductive about being needed so completely, to be seen as the one who never wavers, never doubts, never hesitates. But pay close attention, because loyalty that cannot be questioned is no longer loyalty, it's submission. Unquestioning loyalty is the dream of every manipulator. It's not enough for them that you support them when they're right. They want your support even when they're wrong, especially when they're wrong. That's the real test. Will you defend them in the face of facts, of conscience, of truth? And here's where it gets dangerous. Because once you've pledged your loyalty publicly, once you've defended them in front of others, the cost of backing out becomes unbearable. You start to rationalize, to twist the truth just enough to make it fit. You become the architect of your own blindness, brick by brick, building a prison made of your own words, your own pride. That's the trick. By demanding your loyalty, they're not just gaining your support, they're gaining your silence, your complicity, your self-censorship. And they do it not by force, but by making you afraid to betray the image they've handed you of yourself, the loyal one, the trusted one, the faithful soldier. You'll start to feel it the moment you question them, that tension in the air, that look of disappointment. They won't need to yell. They'll just say they're surprised, hurt. They thought you were different. They thought they could count on you. And now you feel guilty. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've dared to think for yourself. So you stop thinking out loud. You keep doubts hidden. You nod when you want to speak. You agree when you want to scream. And each time you do, you become a little smaller, a little quieter, a little less you. Because this kind of loyalty doesn't just demand silence, it reshapes your identity. It demands that you become someone who no longer asks, "Is this right?" but only, "Is this allowed?" And it doesn't stop with one leader, one group, one cause. Once you learn to obey without question in one part of your life, it becomes easier to obey everywhere else. You start to prefer simplicity over complexity, clarity over ambiguity, allegiance over truth. You become what they always wanted: predictable, controllable, loyal. But ask yourself, loyal to what? To a person, a flag, an ideology, or just to the feeling of belonging? Because if your loyalty is rooted in fear of exclusion, it's not loyalty, it's dependency. And if your loyalty survives only by rejecting reason, it's not strength, it's surrender. The people who demand unquestioning loyalty will never return it. They don't want equals. They want servants. They don't want your trust. They want your obedience. And when you are no longer useful, when your loyalty slips, when your eyes open just enough, they will discard you without hesitation. Because in their eyes, your loyalty was never about you. It was about them, about what you could do, what you could prove, what you could protect. And the cruel irony: the more loyal you are, the more disposable you become. True loyalty doesn't fear questions. It welcomes them. It thrives on accountability. It grows stronger in the presence of doubt because it has nothing to hide. But loyalty without questions is a weapon, pointed not outward, but inward. It's used to control your voice, your values, your sense of self. And once you surrender that, there's nothing left they can't take. So the next time someone demands your loyalty, ask yourself, is it earned or expected? Is it mutual or one-sided? Is it building you or erasing you? Because if they can't handle your doubts, your questions, your truth, then they don't deserve your loyalty at all. And neither does the system that rewards your silence more than your honesty. You're walking through a museum. Each room holds a relic, a text, a sacred image. You're told these are proof, evidence of something deeper. A God, a truth, a history. You don't question it. Why would you? The plaques say it's real. The lighting makes it beautiful. The voice in your headset explains it like gospel. But what if it was planted? What if the truth you believe was never found, but built? People believe what they can see, what they can touch, and more importantly, what others point to as proof. But here's the uncomfortable part. Belief doesn't require truth. It only needs certainty, and certainty can be manufactured. Every lie becomes more believable when it wears the costume of evidence. A fabricated photograph, a forged document, a rehearsed testimonial. And once it's planted, once it's accepted, it begins to grow. It anchors itself into memory, into identity. Until questioning, it feels like tearing out part of yourself. Think about religion, politics, relationships. How many beliefs began, not with reason, but with repetition? A quote attributed to a historical figure, a speech that never happened, a video edited just enough. And each time you see it, the fake proof becomes real in your mind. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Repetition becomes recognition. Recognition becomes belief. Now step back and ask yourself, why would someone plant false evidence? Control. If I can convince you that I have the moral high ground, that I am the victim, that history is on my side, I don't need to argue anymore. I just need to show you a few facts. A screenshot, a tearful interview, a timeline I invented, but framed just right. It doesn't have to hold up to scrutiny. It just has to hold up long enough to be believed. The most insidious part is this: fake proof doesn't just influence belief, it creates it. And once belief is formed, it rewrites memory. You won't remember where you first heard it, only that it feels true, that you've seen it somewhere, that everyone else seems to believe it too. This is how cults work, how conspiracy theories grow. Not by arguing logic, but by flooding the system with just enough fake artifacts to manufacture reality. They don't win the truth, they overwrite it. And it's not always malicious. Sometimes it starts with someone needing to be right, to win an argument, to defend their tribe. They exaggerate, they twist, they invent. And suddenly, a half-truth becomes a cornerstone of someone else's worldview. Even memory betrays us. You remember things that didn't happen. You forget things that did. And if someone shows you a doctored image or a fake article that aligns with what you already suspect, you'll believe it. Because it feels right. And feeling right often beats being right. But the most dangerous use of fake proof isn't just to trick others, it's to trick yourself. You're more likely to believe something if you can see evidence of it, even if you created that evidence. A lie you tell yourself long enough becomes real, especially if you give it props, set pieces, scripts. You convince yourself you're happy by pointing to the vacation photos. That your partner loves you because they bought you flowers. That you're successful because your resume looks impressive. You plant proof in your own life, and then you bow to it. Planting fake proof is effective because it exploits the shortcut your brain takes to protect its worldview. Disconfirmation is painful. It creates dissonance. But planted proof soothes that pain. It tells your brain you were right all along. It's easy to believe what you want to believe when there's something to point at, something to show others, something to remind yourself. So the next time you find yourself clinging to a belief, stop and ask, where did this certainty come from? Who placed it there? And what would it mean if it wasn't real? Because the proof you trust might not be a reflection of reality. It might be a mirror held in front of you by someone who wanted you to believe it. And the scariest part, that someone might have been you. You're not allowed to think for yourself. Not really. Not in any way that truly matters. Because the moment your ideas begin to drift from the script, questioning the norms, challenging the assumptions, doubting the consensus, you become dangerous. And what do societies do with dangerous people? They silence them. Or worse, they make sure no one ever hears them to begin with. Imagine walking into a room where every voice sounds the same. Different faces, different clothes, but the words identical. Approved, rehearsed. That's the world being built around you, not with chains and censorship, but with algorithms and applause. You're taught to believe that the truth always survives, but the truth doesn't win by default. It only wins if it's allowed to speak, and in a world that bans alternative viewpoints, truth dies quietly, smothered under the weight of what's acceptable. This isn't about blatant oppression. It's about subtle erasure. Voices aren't just silenced, they're discredited, demonized, reframed until they sound like madness. You see it everywhere. One moment, someone presents a challenging idea. The next, they're labeled toxic, problematic, harmful. Not because their words were false, but because their words were uncomfortable. Uncomfortable ideas are the most important ones we have. They force us to think, to reevaluate, to confront contradictions. But comfort is king now, and comfort hates dissent. Comfort needs uniformity. It needs every opinion to feel safe, every conversation predictable. So anything that threatens that comfort, anything that makes people think too hard, feel too much, or question the wrong things, has to go. This is how control disguises itself as virtue. We're protecting people, they say. We're creating safe spaces. But what they're really doing is narrowing the boundaries of thought until the only ideas that remain are the ones that serve the system. It's not safety, It's sterilization. It's not inclusion, it's indoctrination. And here's the catch, it's always justified. Banning alternative viewpoints doesn't feel like tyranny, it feels like progress. You're told it's about stopping misinformation. You're told it's about protecting marginalized voices. But ask yourself, who decides what counts as truth? Who decides which voices are worth protecting? It's never you. It's never the public. It's always power, always. You've been trained not just to accept this, but to cheer for it, to feel moral, even righteous, as the scope of allowable thought shrinks, to believe that banning opposing ideas is a sign of enlightenment. But there is nothing enlightened about intellectual conformity. There is nothing moral about enforced consensus. And the scariest part, you don't even notice it happening. The ideas don't disappear in a flash. They fade, slowly. One banned post here, one deplatformed voice there, one policy update, one content moderation decision. It's never dramatic enough to spark outrage, just subtle enough to seem reasonable. Until one day you look around and realize every thought you hear has already been approved. Alternative viewpoints aren't just ideas, they're escape hatches, lifelines, warnings. When you silence them, you don't just lose intellectual diversity, you lose the tools to spot deception. You lose the ability to detect manipulation. You lose the language to resist. This is how control becomes complete, not by locking people in cells, but by locking their minds in echo chambers. Not by burning books, but by burying ideas so deep in algorithms and disapproval that they might as well never have existed. So the next time you hear that an idea has been banned, a speaker deplatformed, a topic deemed too dangerous, pause, ask yourself who benefits from that silence. Ask yourself why you're not allowed to hear it. And most of all, ask yourself what you've already lost without even realizing it. Because when alternative viewpoints are banned, you're not just being protected from harm, you're being protected from the truth. And that kind of protection, it's just another word for control. You're walking through a building when the fire alarm suddenly blares. People scramble, panic spreads, and you heart pounding. Follow the herd toward the exit. But what if there's no fire? What if the alarm was pulled on purpose, not to signal danger, but to control your behavior? This isn't just a hypothetical. It's a strategy. And it happens more often than you think. Creating a false crisis is one of the most effective tools of manipulation. It hijacks your instincts. It overrides logic. And in your rush to feel safe, you surrender control willingly, almost gratefully. Because when fear enters the room, reason quietly slips out the back door. You're hardwired for threat detection. When something feels urgent, immediate, and dangerous, you don't deliberate. You react. This makes sense for natural disasters, predators, real emergencies. But manipulators exploit this wiring by manufacturing the illusion of danger. They build fake emergencies just plausible enough to feel real. Think of governments rallying support for war with vague threats of terror. Think of companies launching flash sales with artificial deadlines. Think of a partner insisting we need to talk right now to corner you emotionally. The tactic is always the same. Compress your time to think, pressure you to act, and trap you in a decision you didn't fully choose. It's not just manipulation, it's engineering obedience through fear. The brilliance of this tactic is its simplicity. When everything feels like it's falling apart, people crave clarity. They want certainty, a savior, a solution. And whoever provides that illusion of control, no matter how flawed, becomes a hero. Even if they started the fire themselves, that's the sinister beauty of a false crisis. It creates the very conditions needed to justify extreme measures. Surveillance, censorship, crackdowns, takeovers, all in the name of restoring order. But there was no order broken, just the illusion of it, shattered deliberately. This tactic isn't new. It's ancient. The Roman Empire would stage public spectacles during times of unrest, not just for entertainment, but to divert attention from corruption. The phrase bread and circuses wasn't about kindness, it was about pacification. Modern crises are more subtle, but no less effective. Media cycles flood you with chaos. Headlines scream catastrophe. Every new event is unprecedented, shocking, the end of something. And when you're drowning in perceived emergencies, your mind becomes exhausted. You start trusting whoever sounds confident, even if they're lying, especially if they're lying, because calm in a storm, even false calm, feels like truth. And the more you're exposed to these manufactured crises, the more dependent you become on the very systems causing them. You cling to the people who fix the emergencies they created. They don't need to burn books anymore. They just need to make you afraid of reading them. Conformity isn't just a social behavior. It's a currency, a performance, a test. And like all tests in this world, there are rewards for passing and punishments for failing. From the time you could walk, you were taught what to say, how to behave, what to believe. Not through violence, at least not always, but through something more effective. Approval, praise, belonging. Every gold star in school, every pat on the back, every good job was conditioning. A subtle whisper. Obey and you'll be accepted. Conform and you'll be safe. But what happens when you don't? When you question the rules, or worse, break them? You're punished, not always by force, but by silence, by shame, by isolation. They don't need to beat you to control you. All they have to do is turn their backs, make you feel like the only one who doesn't get the joke. The one left out. Alone. And here's the terrifying part, it works. Social rejection activates the same parts of your brain as physical pain. Being cast out doesn't just hurt emotionally, it registers as real bodily suffering. So your brain learns the lesson fast. Don't stand out, don't dissent, don't challenge the narrative. Because dissent, in this system, is not bravery. It's a threat. This is how control operates now. Not through chains or guns, but through incentives. Obey, and you get the promotion. Stay quiet, and you get to keep your friends. Keep your head down, and you might just survive. But speak up. Rock the boat. Suddenly, you're difficult. You're angry. You're crazy. Your credibility evaporates. You're marginalized, ridiculed, made into a cautionary tale. Not because you were wrong, but because you were loud, because you didn't play along. Every institution runs on this unspoken algorithm. Workplaces reward the agreeable and sideline, the disruptors. Schools uplift the obedient and stifle the curious. Even families, often unconsciously, teach kids that love is conditional, dependent on their ability to conform. And if you think you're above it, think again. The need to fit in is buried so deep, it feels like instinct, because it is. Evolution favored tribes, safety in numbers. Rejection once meant death. That ancient terror still echoes inside you. So they exploit it. They create norms, not because they're right, but because they're useful. They craft ideologies, not to seek truth, but to demand allegiance. And the second you diverge, you become the enemy, not of people, but of the system that feeds on their fear of standing alone. And yet, here's the paradox. Every major leap in history, every act of real change began with a dissenter, a non-conformist, someone who said no when everyone else said yes. But what did they get for it? Martin Luther King got a bullet. Socrates got hemlock. Galileo got house arrest. Dissent may lead to truth, but it almost always travels through suffering. So the system keeps the equation simple. Reward conformity. Punish dissent. And do it early. Do it often. Until questioning feels dangerous, and obedience feels like virtue. This is why propaganda works better than censorship. Because if you teach people what to think, they'll do the silencing for you. They'll mock the outsider, report the protester, cancel the heretic, not because they're cruel, but because they're terrified. Conformity is comfort. Dissent is exile. But what if you stopped seeking their comfort? What if you let the exile make you strong? Because here's the hidden truth. They need you to conform, but you don't need them. Not to be free, not to be honest, not to be whole. You only need the courage to stand alone long enough for others to see that they're not alone either. And then the system starts to crack. It starts with a whisper, then a conversation, then a movement. And that movement, that's where the real power lives. Not in conformity, but in courage. Not in silence, but in truth. The rewards of obedience are temporary, but the cost of silence, that's permanent. Picture this. A new parent, tired and overwhelmed, stares down at their screaming child in a grocery store aisle. A stranger walks up and whispers, "Don't worry, everyone goes through this." The parent nods, comforted. But what if that whisper isn't just sympathy? Suggest everyone does it, and suddenly the behavior doesn't feel wrong. It feels normal, universal, acceptable. That's the trick. That's the trap. When you hear that phrase, everyone does it, your brain immediately begins a mental shuffle. You weigh your shame against imagined consensus. You downplay your doubts. You rewrite your reality. Because if everyone lies on their resume, cheats on their taxes, manipulates their partner just a little, then it's not really lying, not really cheating, not really manipulation. It's just life. It's just how things work. This is how moral erosion begins, not with grand decisions, but with quiet permissions. The phrase is disarming. It softens resistance, pacifies guilt, and converts ethical alarm bells into whispers of rationalization. The more it's repeated, the more convincing it becomes. It doesn't even need to be true. It just needs to feel true. Because once you're convinced others are doing it, the fear of being the only one who isn't becomes unbearable. No one wants to be the fool. No one wants to be the only honest one in a room full of liars, the only loyal one in a crowd of betrayers, the only person suffering when shortcuts are available. And that's the psychological genius of it. Everyone does it, turns personal integrity into a liability. You start to feel naive for not lying, weak for not taking advantage, stupid for holding on to principles, and so you bend, you flex, you give in, not because you're malicious, but because you don't want to be left behind. It's a weapon cloaked in comfort, a social anesthetic. You hear it from co-workers justifying their corner cutting, from friends explaining their infidelity, from leaders excusing their corruption. Everyone does it. It's not just normalization, it's permission with plausible deniability. And the more you believe it, the more likely you are to spread it, to justify your own actions to others, to become the whisperer in someone else's ear. This isn't just about individual choices. It's about culture. It's about systems built on silence and complicity. When enough people believe the lie, it becomes the new truth. Honesty becomes the outlier. Corruption becomes routine. Think of the corporate world. Ethics training in the morning, toxic policies by the afternoon. Think of politics. Scandals break, public outrage erupts, and then the old refrain returns. Well, what did you expect? Everyone does it. We become numb, predictable, controlled. Suggesting everyone does it is a form of gaslighting. It attacks your perception of morality. It makes you doubt your own values. And when repeated often enough, it makes the deviant seem decent and the decent seem deluded. It's peer pressure wrapped in reassurance. And it's powerful because it doesn't need to win an argument. It just needs to whisper when you're tired, when you're unsure, when you need an excuse. But here's the question you have to ask. Even if everyone did do it, does that make it right? Would you want to live in a world where every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation is excused because it's common? Does ubiquity equal morality? Or does it just mean the infection has spread? The truth is, everyone does it is rarely accurate, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to feel like enough people do it that you won't be punished, or worse, that you'll be punished for not joining in. And so you conform. You become another node in the system, another soldier in the army of the ethically compromised. But here's the final twist. The people who use this tactic the most, they know it's a manipulation. They use it because it works. Because once you've excused one small lie, one small betrayal, you're on a slippery slope. Control. You're easier to manage when your hands are dirty too. So the next time you hear it, everyone does it. Pause. Ask yourself who benefits from your compliance, who gains when your standards slip. Because behind that phrase is always an agenda. You're in the middle of an argument. Maybe it's with your partner, your boss, or a complete stranger online. You've made a point, something logical, reasonable, maybe even true, but they're not budging. Their face is blank. Their arms are crossed. You can feel the resistance building like a dam about to burst. And then, without planning it, you raise your voice. You don't mean to scream, but you do. Loud, sharp, sudden. And just like that, they flinch. For a split second, you have their full attention. Not because they're convinced, but because they're stunned. This is the power of volume, not as aggression, but as interruption. Yelling isn't just noise. It's a psychological jolt. It disorients. It scrambles the script. It forces a pause in someone's mental flow, hijacking the rhythm of resistance before it can fully solidify. See, resistance, whether it's emotional, intellectual, or ideological, isn't just stubbornness. It's structure. It builds slowly, like armor being fastened piece by piece. Arguments, doubts, counterpoints, they stack in layers. But yelling? It bypasses logic. It jumps the queue. It shocks the system long enough to reset the frame. It doesn't matter if the yell is rational. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. What matters is the disruption, the stun, the breach in emotional momentum. And once there's a crack, people become malleable. Not always permanently, but for a few seconds, their defenses are suspended. Their sense of control shaken. This is why authoritarians yell. It's why abusers yell. It's why cult leaders raise their voices at key moments during indoctrination speeches. The yell becomes a tool, not of rage, but of dominance through destabilization. Because yelling can force submission, not through logic, but through momentary chaos. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a yell, not the absence of sound, but a vacuum of certainty. People second-guess themselves in that space. Did I say something wrong? Did I miss something? Should I be scared? That tiny seed of doubt, planted in a moment of stunned silence, is often enough to reroute behavior. And once that seed is planted, control becomes easier. This tactic shows up everywhere. Think about police interrogations, high-pressure sales environments, even certain types of therapy. A sudden raise in tone, a shift in energy, used not to clarify, but to dominate. The goal is simple. Interrupt resistance before it can fully form. Confusion is leverage, and it works because we're wired to respond to threats. Loud sounds trigger the amygdala. They override the neocortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought. In survival mode, the brain doesn't ask questions, it obeys. And the louder the input, the stronger the override. You've probably felt it yourself. That moment someone yells at you, and your entire body freezes. You forget your argument. You forget what you were defending. All you feel is the intensity, the pressure, the need to retreat or submit. That's not weakness. That's biology. But here's the terrifying part. Once you've been stunned, the next message that enters your brain sinks deeper. Yelling weakens resistance, but what comes after cements control. I only say this because I care about you. If you listened the first time, I wouldn't have to raise my voice. She leans in, not dramatically, not suspiciously. Just a slight tilt, a lowering of the voice, almost a whisper. And suddenly you're leaning in too. Not because she told you to, but because something in your brain told you that what's coming next must be important. Intimate, honest. Whispering has that power. It bypasses the logical gatekeepers in your mind and speaks directly to something older, more primal. Whispering forces closeness, not just physical proximity, but psychological closeness. It mimics the sounds of safety, the tone of trust. It's what mothers use with their babies. It's what lovers use in the dark, what friends use when sharing secrets they shouldn't. It tells your nervous system, this is not a threat, this is connection. But that's the trick, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter what the words actually are, it only matters how they're delivered. Someone could whisper a lie, a manipulation, a veiled threat, and it would still feel like intimacy. Your defense is lower, not because you're gullible, but because your brain is wired for it. A whisper bypasses analysis and goes straight to emotion. That's why manipulators whisper. Not always literally, but they soften their voice. They control their volume. They adjust their tone just enough to trigger a sense of closeness. They confide in you, pretend you're special, that this truth is just for you, and you believe it. Because it feels different from a shout or a command. It feels like trust, but it's not trust, it's control disguised as vulnerability. Think about how cult leaders speak, or master con artists, or toxic partners. They rarely scream. They rarely rant. Instead, they bring you in close. They speak softly. They make you feel chosen. They whisper their poison so sweetly that you mistake it for medicine. And once you've let it in, it's hard to get it out. Because the whisper doesn't just deliver information. It delivers identity. It says, you and I are the same. We see the world the same way. It flatters your ego, confirms your biases, makes you feel understood in a world where most people don't even hear you. And when someone makes you feel seen like that, you want to keep listening, even if deep down, something feels off. You're in a tense meeting. A confrontation is brewing. Someone criticizes you unfairly, maybe even cruelly. All eyes shift to you. The room is silent, expectant. And instead of reacting, you say nothing. Not a word, not a twitch, just silence. That moment, those few seconds of deliberate, uncomfortable quiet, can be more powerful than any argument, more unsettling than shouting, more intimidating than rage. Why? Because silence isn't neutral. Silence is a mirror. It reflects the tension in the room, amplifies the unease, and forces the other person to fill it. And when people fill silence under pressure, they often reveal more than they intended. They ramble, backtrack, or get flustered. The spotlight, instead of dimming, burns hotter. In a world addicted to noise, silence feels unnatural. It triggers anxiety. People expect a reaction, a rebuttal, a denial, a defense. So when none comes, when you offer only silence, it creates a psychological vacuum, one that the other person rushes to fill, often with self-doubt. This tactic is not about withdrawal, it's about presence. You're not retreating, you're holding. You're forcing them to confront the weight of their own words without offering them a target. It's like stepping out of the line of fire and letting them shoot blanks into the void. Predators in nature do something similar. They freeze, they watch, they let their stillness become a statement. And that stillness, that lack of visible threat, becomes terrifying in its ambiguity. You don't know what they'll do, and the not knowing, the waiting, is what makes your heart pound. In conversation, this plays out in subtle, devastating ways. Imagine someone confronts you at work. They accuse you of slacking off, of not doing your part. You meet their gaze, calm and still. You don't argue, you don't protest, you just pause. Let the silence stretch. Let their own words echo back at them. What happens next? They get uncomfortable. They start second-guessing themselves. Maybe they repeat the accusation, weaker this time. Maybe they soften it. Maybe they start explaining themselves. Because silence feels like judgment, and judgment, when unspoken, feels absolute. Used correctly, silence shifts the power dynamic. It shows restraint. It says, I'm not desperate to defend myself. It says, I don't owe you an explanation. It says, you're not worth my words right now. And people feel that. Picture yourself at the end of a long day. Your body aches, your mind is foggy, and all you want is relief. You collapse into the couch. A screen glows in front of you. A show starts playing, something loud, fast, forgettable. You don't even remember clicking it. It just appeared like magic. Before you realize it, 3 hours vanish. Your thoughts muted, your questions gone, your discontent numbed into stillness. This isn't leisure, it's anesthesia. Entertainment, when weaponized, becomes the perfect distraction. Not because it's evil, but because it's effortless. It doesn't demand your attention. It seduces it. It offers escape, not insight. Comfort, not challenge. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because while you're immersed in digital fantasy, real control is happening quietly in the background. Think about the structure of your life. The stress, the pressure, the exhaustion. The system keeps you constantly moving, constantly grinding, until you're too tired to resist. And just when the fatigue reaches its peak, what's waiting for you? Entertainment, instant, endless, tailored precisely to your preferences. It doesn't just distract you, it pacifies you. It turns your fatigue into silence. You scroll through an app while injustice happens around you. You laugh at a meme while another law strips away your rights. You binge a series about rebellion while never noticing your own submission. That's the trick. Entertainment doesn't hide the truth. It just makes you stop caring about it. And the most disturbing part, you invite it in. You crave it, because it's easier to lose yourself in fiction than to confront reality. The more you consume, the less you question. The less you question, the more compliant you become. It's not a conspiracy. It doesn't need to be. Because distraction doesn't require deception. It only needs your consent. Governments know this. Corporations thrive on it. The louder the noise, the quieter your mind. Complex issues are reduced to sound bites. Suffering becomes content. Revolution becomes a costume worn by actors on a screen. And slowly, you start mistaking visibility for action, awareness for change. You tweet, you share, you comment, but you don't move. You don't act, because you're comfortable, entertained, controlled. Remember the last time you felt restless, angry, motivated to do something, anything. And then remember how quickly that feeling dissolved when a video auto-played, when a game loaded, when a story gripped you just tightly enough to keep your hands off reality. This isn't accidental, it's by design. You are most manageable when your mind is elsewhere. Entertainment isn't the enemy, but unchecked, it becomes a leash. One you fasten to your own neck. One you decorate with fandoms, trends and distractions that keep you docile. Ask yourself, how many hours have you surrendered? How many nights have you traded curiosity for convenience? How many thoughts have been drowned out by the soothing rhythm of passivity? You weren't born to be a spectator. You weren't made to watch the world through a screen. And yet, here you are, living second-hand lives while your own fades into the background. Distraction is powerful because it feels harmless. It feels earned. But the price is clarity. The cost is agency. Every moment lost to manufactured amusement is a moment you weren't thinking critically, weren't resisting, weren't alive in the way that truly matters. So what happens when a society lives this way? When generations are raised on loops of distraction? The answer is already here. Apathy disguised as engagement. Outrage with no action. Lives curated for display, not for meaning. And it's not about quitting entertainment entirely. It's about reclaiming your mind. About choosing when to engage and when to retreat. About noticing when you've stopped thinking and started absorbing. That's the first step, awareness. Because once you see distraction for what it is, it can't control you. Not fully. Not forever. Entertainment isn't neutral. It shapes you. And the more power you give it, the more of yourself you lose. So next time the screen lights up and beckons you in, stop and ask, what am I avoiding? Who benefits from my distraction? And what would I be doing if I still remembered how to care? They don't hide the bad news anymore. They just bury it under spreadsheets, jargon and charts, so dense they make your eyes glaze over. Not because the truth is absent, but because it's drowned, camouflaged in a data avalanche, so overwhelming, you stop looking for meaning and just accept what you're told. It's not deception by omission, it's deception by saturation. Imagine a corporate earnings report. Somewhere on page 35, in a footnote smaller than your thumb, it casually mentions a mass layoff. Thousands of people, lives uprooted, futures shattered, reduced to a line item. Surrounding it, triumphant figures about quarterly growth, market share, and restructuring synergies. The pain is buried in percentages. The suffering diluted in decimal points. This is no accident. This is precision. Because if you control the framing, you control the interpretation. If the headline says profits up 10%, most people never dig deep enough to see what that profit cost. Whose healthcare got cut, whose community was gutted, whose safety was traded for efficiency. Numbers sanitize pain. They turn human cost into sterile abstractions. You don't feel a number. You don't empathize with a percentage. Governments do it too. Crime statistics drop. Sounds good, right? Until you learn violent crimes are down, but domestic abuse reports are surging. Or employment is up, but the jobs are gig work with no benefits. Truth wrapped in data becomes elastic, stretchable, moldable. It's not about facts anymore. It's about the narrative you build around them. And the best part, you're complicit. You want to believe the top-line number. You want to trust the pretty graphs. They give you comfort, certainty. They save you from the heavy lifting of skepticism. When someone says, look, it's all here in the data, it feels objective, even when it's a weapon. Because we've been trained to believe that numbers don't lie. But they do. Or more accurately, the people presenting them do. Data doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every data set has a context, a source, an agenda. Show a graph that starts in a recession year, and you'll see a miracle recovery. Change the axis scale, and a crisis looks like a hiccup. It's manipulation hidden in plain sight. A magician's trick, where the misdirection is your own trust in logic. The tragedy is that this tactic works best on the intelligent, the educated, the rational. Because the smarter you are, the more susceptible you become to over-analyzing, to assuming that, with enough information, you'll reach clarity. But sometimes clarity isn't missing. It's being deliberately obscured. You can stare at a storm of numbers and still miss the hurricane hidden inside them. This isn't just about information overload. It's psychological warfare. You're being taught to disconnect feeling from fact, to see suffering as a metric, to absorb injustice through bar graphs and trend lines until it feels abstract, distant, irrelevant. And once your empathy is severed, your resistance is neutralized. You stop reacting, you stop asking questions, you start accepting that maybe things aren't so bad. After all, the data looks fine, and that's the final twist. The more buried the bad news becomes, the more passive you become. Not because you're lazy, but because you're overwhelmed. It's not that you don't care, it's that you can't hold on to what matters when you're drowning in what doesn't. Your emotional bandwidth is saturated by trivia, disguised as insight. So next time you see a glowing headline backed by 50 pages of charts, ask yourself, what are they not saying? What's hiding in the margins, the footnotes, the silence between the statistics? Picture yourself raising your hand to question a rule everyone else accepts without thought. The room falls silent. Eyes flicker with amusement, curiosity, judgment. A laugh ripples through the crowd. You feel heat flood your cheeks. Shame creeps in, heavy and insistent. Your throat tightens. You lower your hand and force a smile. You pretend this never happened. That moment mocking your hesitation, ridiculing your doubt, is no accident. It is a carefully calibrated move. Mock uncompliance to shame. A simple phrase that packs a punch. It means laugh at the one who dares to disagree until they shrink back into line. Why does laughter hurt so much more when it's pointed at you? Because it carries a secret message. It tells you that your question, your discomfort, your refusal to follow the herd is not merely unpopular. It is unacceptable. It brands you as other, flawed, unworthy. It wards off dissent like a razor's edge. First comes the whisper in the hallway. You skipped a meeting. You challenged a policy. Someone whispers your name, and a smile twists on their lips. That smile spreads. Soon a dozen voices echo it. Behind your back, before your face, the mockery begins. You hear snatches of conversation. Did you see them? What were they thinking? They can't even follow simple rules. This whisper grows into a chorus. At the water cooler, in the group chat, even in the family dinner. You become the joke. Your resistance, once an act of courage, turns into a punchline. And you laugh along too, because the alternative is isolation. So you laugh, and you nod, and you surrender. But mockery is only the sharpened spear. Shame is the scorpion's sting, hidden in its tail. The laughter fades, but the shame lingers. It wraps itself around your mind at night, keeps you awake replaying that moment. It whispers that you deserved it. You asked for this humiliation. It convinces you that if you ever had the courage again to dissent, you would invite the laughter back. Watch how this plays out in the office. Imagine suggesting a better way to run a project, only to be told you're naive, you're idealistic, you're out of touch with reality. You wake up before dawn, earbuds in place, and the first thing you hear is your morning mantra, rise and grind. It loops through your mind as you shower. It follows you into breakfast. By the time you step out the door, you believe that every hour not spent hustling is a wasted opportunity. But did you choose this belief, or was it drummed into you day after day until you couldn't imagine any other way? You see slogans everywhere, on billboards, in social media feeds, whispered by friends who repeat them like gospel. Live your best life. Work hard. Play hard. If you're not first, you're last. These phrases feel like advice, like friendly tips to guide you. Yet each repetition is a gentle shove, molding your thoughts without you noticing. Each slogan becomes a tiny echo chamber in your brain. With every replay, you believe more deeply. Think about radio ads that tell you to just do it. The words themselves mean nothing until your mind has heard them hundreds of times. Then they become a challenge, a demand, an identity. You strap on expensive shoes, lace them up tight, and suddenly your whole life revolves around achieving athletic greatness. Whether you run or not, you don't question why you need those shoes. You only know that they define who you are. And it's not limited to products. Political campaigns run on repetition too. Make our country great again. 5 simple words. You hear them in speeches, on posters, in ads. Over and over, they seep into your subconscious. Before you know it, opposing views feel like betrayal. You find yourself arguing the slogan's logic, defending it fiercely. You didn't read a policy paper. You felt a phrase resonate until it seemed undeniable. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity breeds acceptance. With enough acceptance, you start to fill in the gaps yourself. You invent meaning where none existed. You project complexity onto empty words. The slogan is just 6 syllables, yet you become convinced it holds the solution to all your problems. You chant it in your head like a prayer and wait for salvation. Have you ever watched a political rally? Thousands of people, arms raised, voices unified. It's almost hypnotic. The speaker repeats the slogan again and again while lights flash and drums pound. You feel energy coursing through the crowd. You're not thinking, you're feeling. Each repetition is a drumbeat in your chest, and you become part of something larger than yourself. You surrender your doubts to the collective chant. Repetition works because your brain craves patterns. It seeks shortcuts. When you hear the same phrase, your mind stores it as a known quantity.